Picture a city of 800,000 souls crammed into an area smaller than some English county towns. Now add 200,000 more, because the countryside is emptying itself into it season by season, year by year, and no wall is high enough and no city gate strong enough to stop what hunger sets in motion. Add the smell of the Seine at low summer water, which is less a smell and more a decision the river makes about how much of itself it will share with the surrounding atmosphere. Add the tanneries along the Bièvre, the gut cleaners, the tripe sellers, the charnel stench rising from churchyards so old and so full that the bones have run out of room and begun pushing themselves back through the soil like teeth. Add the perfumers of the Rue Saint-Denis doing their absolute best against all of this with lavender oil and rose water, and a tar of things too precious to name. That is Paris, the most beautiful and the most appalling city in the world, depending entirely on whether you're standing inside Versailles looking out, or standing on the Rue de la Mortellerie looking in any direction at all. We are going back tonight. Not to the Versailles version, not to the painted ceilings and the fountains and the powdered wigs. We are going to the other Paris, the real Paris, the one that smells like what cities smell like when 500,000 people are trying to be poor in the same place at the same time. It is 1787, the year before everything breaks. You will not know that. You cannot know that, standing in your Garni room at 4 a.m. with frost on the inside of the window, and 6 sous in your pocket and a basket to fill before the bells of Saint-Eustache finish telling the city it is no longer night. You cannot know that the bread queues forming even now in the Faubourg Saint-Antoine are the beginning of something that will change everything you have ever understood about France, about kings, about the right of certain men to eat while other men starve. You can only know the cold, the particular cold of a Paris winter that has been going on too long and has run out of mercy, that gets into the wool of your shawl and makes it feel like wearing damp paper, that makes your feet on the bare wooden floorboards feel like someone else's feet, belonging to someone who's been much colder than you for a much longer time. So I make these history stories, and honestly I have no idea if anyone actually sleeps to them, or if you're all just very specific people who enjoy listening to young French women calculate flour margins at 4 a.m. while Paris slowly loses its mind. Either way, subscribe if you want, get comfortable. Here we go. You can only know what you owe Madame Torchon for last night's straw and last night's roof, and what you will owe her for tonight's, and how many bunches of violets and carnations and dried lavender bundles that works out to, and how many of those you can sell before the flowers die, because flowers do not wait, and neither does Madame Torchon. Get up. Your name is Colette Aubert. You are 15 years old. You came to Paris from Rouen 8 months ago, in the spring, when you still thought Paris was something you had to see before you died, when dying still felt like a distant and hypothetical thing. You came with your Aunt Hortense, who knew a woman who sometimes needed help washing linen for a household on the Ile de la Cité, who had said there was always work in Paris for a girl who wasn't afraid of it. Your Aunt Hortense is dead. She's been dead for 4 months. A fever came through the Garni in July, the kind of fever that Paris generates in summer, the way other cities generate fog, and it took 3 people from the building on the Rue aux Ours, and one of them was Hortense. The fever did not ask her permission. The fever did not care that she was the only person in Paris who knew your name, before this city taught you what your name was worth, which is nothing, which is less than nothing, which is the absence of anything. You are still here because leaving costs money you do not have. You are still here because Rouen has nothing for you either. Your father's loom sits idle since the English flooded the market with cloth so cheap it turned French weavers into beggars. And the Eden Treaty that a minister signed in 1786 to demonstrate how modern and trade-forward France had become finished off what your family's savings had started to cover. You're still here because Paris is at least a place where a girl can sell flowers if she gets up early enough and works hard enough and does not attract the wrong kind of attention from the wrong kind of man. That last condition is harder than it sounds. The room you sleep in holds 4 straw mattresses, and tonight 3 of them hold other girls. Marie-Jeanne, who does washing for a bourgeois family in the Marais, and comes back every evening smelling of lye and exhaustion. Angelique, who you're fairly certain does something at night that is not selling flowers, though she always says she's selling flowers, though you've never once seen her with flowers. And a girl whose name you learned only last week, Sophie, just arrived from somewhere in the Loire Valley, who cried for 3 nights running and has now gone very quiet in the way that means she has decided something about her life that she is not ready to say out loud yet. You pull on your stockings in the dark, standing, because there is no room to sit while putting on stockings when 4 people share a room this size. You pull them up over feet that feel like clay, and you can feel the darning at the heel, where you spent an entire Sunday afternoon last month trying to close the hole before it became a disaster. The darning is lumpy. It rubs. By noon it will have raised a blister on the back of your heel that you will walk on for the rest of the day without stopping, because stopping is not a thing you can afford to do with a basket of flowers that need to be sold before they decide to stop being flowers and start being compost. Your dress is wool, dark blue, gone grey at the elbows and hem. Over it goes the bodice, laced quickly, tight enough to hold without being tight enough to breathe badly. The apron, white at the start of the week, and now a story told in flower stain and street mud. The shawl, large enough to wrap twice and still drag at the edges. The wooden sabots that you clip across the floor in because proper shoes are for people with proper money, and the noise they make on the boards does not wake the others because the others sleep like the dead, the way poor people sleep when they've truly used themselves up. The corridor smells of the building's collected breathing. 12 rooms, maybe 60 people, all exuding the particular warmth and sourness of humans in winter who cannot afford enough water to wash as often as comfort would require. You have been in this building long enough that you do not notice it anymore, except in those first seconds after you step from your room into the corridor, when you notice it with your entire body all at once, and then it fades, and you become part of it yourself. Down the stairs, the treads creak in the same places every morning. Second step from the top, the left side. 6th step, the right side, near the wall. It is a knowledge so specific and so useless outside of this particular building that you sometimes think it is the thing Paris has most thoroughly taught you, where to step and where not to step, and how much force to apply, and what the consequence of getting it wrong sounds like. Out into the Rue aux Ours, the cold hits you like a hand, not a gentle hand, the hand of a person who means business. It is January of 1787, and Paris has been cold since November, and the cold has not yet reached the part of its argument where it considers being finished. The sky above the narrow canyon of the street is the kind of dark that is not night, but is not yet morning, the in-between dark that belongs to nobody except the people who have no choice but to be in it. Somewhere to the east, down toward the river, a lantern is swinging in an arch over an intersection, and its light is doing almost nothing except marking the place where the darkness is slightly less convincing than everywhere else. The streets smell of cold and ice and the frozen mud that will unfreeze by midday and become regular mud, which is worse, which is the thing that gets into your sabbers and between the leather and the sole and makes a noise like someone chewing with their mouth open every step you take. You walk north toward the markets. This is what your days begin with. This walk in the dark, alone, through streets that are never entirely empty, because Paris is never entirely empty, because there are always people for whom the distinction between night and day is a luxury that circumstances have not permitted them. The man sleeping in the doorway of the chandler's shop on the Rue Saint-Denis, wrapped in something that used to be a coat. The woman with a bundle of firewood twice her size picking her way carefully over the ice near the fountain. A boy who cannot be more than 8, running somewhere with the focused urgency of someone on an errand that does not bear delaying, his breath coming in small white puffs in the cold air. Paris in winter before dawn. You know this city now. Not the city of the guidebooks that the English milords carry when they make their grand tours. Not the city of the marble churches and the academies and the Comédie Française and the witty conversations in the salons of the Faubourg Saint-Germain. You know this city, the one that exists at 4 in the morning, the one made of cold stone and frozen mud and the sounds of people getting on with the business of surviving. The Marché des Innocents is not yet a year old in its current form. They moved it only in 1786, cleared out the old charnel house, removed what they could of 8 centuries of Parisian dead from the cemetery of the innocents, and turned the site into a proper market square surrounded by a new fountain that everyone agrees is beautiful, and some people agree actually works. Before that, the flower sellers and the vegetable sellers and the herb sellers crowded around the cemetery itself, selling things that grow from earth not far from the place where everything eventually returns to earth, which is either poetic or horrible, depending on how much poetry you've had the occasion to develop a taste for. You arrive at the market at 4:20 by the clock above the church of Saint-Eustache, whose bells have just finished their quarter-hour assertion that time exists and is paying attention. The market is already alive. Not the busy alive of midday, not the shouting and pushing and bargaining alive that will come with the daylight hours, but the quiet, professional alive of the people who are there before the customers arrive, who are arranging and sorting and considering, who know what they are doing in the specific way that you know what you're doing only after you've done it enough times, that doing it has become something your hands understand without requiring instructions from your mind. The flower sellers have their usual places near the north side of the fountain. There are perhaps 30 of them at this hour, women mostly, with 1 or 2 men who have the specific air of men who find themselves doing women's work and have made their peace with it and dare you to say something. Madeleine is already there, which means Madeleine has been there since 4, which means Madeleine arrived when it was still properly dark, which is what Madeleine always does, because Madeleine has been doing this for 20 years. And 20 years of doing anything teaches you that the people who arrive first get the best stock, and the people who arrive last get the wilted remainder. And the wilted remainder is the difference between earning enough and not earning enough, which, when you are a flower girl in Paris in January of 1787, is the difference that matters most. Madeleine Voss is 42 years old and looks 60, which is not an insult, which is just what 42 looks like when you've spent 20 winters outdoors selling flowers in a city that considers warmth a personal luxury. She's wide in the shoulders, narrow in the hips, and she wears her shawl pinned at the front with a pin that she told you once was given to her by a man she loved when she was young, and you believed her, And then you notice that the pin is identical to the ones sold by the pin seller on the corner of the Rue Saint-Honoré for 2 sous apiece, and you chose to continue believing her, because the story costs you nothing, and the truth would cost her something she cannot get back. Madeleine is missing the tip of her right index finger, the top joint gone to frostbite 7 winters ago, and this means she holds flowers in a particular way, using the remaining length of the finger to support the stem from underneath rather than pinching, and it looks strange until you realize she has compensated completely for it, and her bundles are as tight and neat as anyone's. Tighter, neater, because Madeleine has had to think about every movement her hands make, which means she has thought about it more than people whose hands work automatically, and thinking about something more than you need to usually makes you better at it. She nods at you when you arrive. This is the greeting, the nod. You've been buying from her source and selling near her pitch for 8 months, which in flower girl mathematics makes you essentially family. And family in this context means a nod before dawn, and occasionally the information that the carnations from the Loire are better quality this week than the ones from the south, and occasionally the protection of being seen to belong to someone when a man decides to become a problem, which men in Paris decide to do with a frequency that would be exhausting if exhaustion was something you could afford. The violettes are good this morning, Madeleine says, not looking at you. Looking at the crates of flowers being unloaded from a cart by a boy who looks annoyed about being awake. The carnations are not. You look at the carnations. You agree with Madeleine about the carnations. The violettes de Parme come from Grasse, down in the south where it is warm enough to grow things that Paris cannot grow for itself, and they arrive packed carefully in wooden crates lined with damp cloth, and they smell. They smell like something a poet would use as the central argument of an entire poem, sweet and dark and particular, in a way that cuts through the cold and the mud and the smell of 60 people sleeping, and makes you remember, briefly, that there are places in the world where the air smells like this naturally, just by existing, without anyone having to work for it. You spend 11 sous on your stock. This is more than you want to spend and less than you need to spend to have a truly good day. And the difference between those two calculations is one of the ongoing mathematical arguments of your existence. You get a bunch of the violettes, 2 bunches of pale roses that are not quite in season but are being sold at a price that suggests the merchant knows they're not quite in season and would prefer you not to look too closely at the outer petals, a bundle of dried lavender tied with a twist of ribbon, and a collection of what the seller calls jonquilles, but which are actually narcissae, and which you know are actually narcissi because Madeleine told you this last month, and added that the seller has been calling them jonquilles for 15 years, and no one has bothered to correct him because customers prefer jonquilles because the word sounds more expensive. Names matter, Madeleine said that day. A bouquet of flowers costs what flowers cost. A bouquet of violettes de Grasse costs what things from Grasse cost. This is the kind of a lesson that takes 1 sentence to say and a lifetime to learn properly. You arrange the flowers in your basket with the same care that a painter arranges colours. The violettes in the centre where they will catch the eye first, and the smell will do the work that your voice will have to finish. The roses around the edges where their openness gives the impression of abundance, even when abundance is not precisely what you have. The dried lavender tucked in at intervals so the whole thing is a coherent argument for the existence of beauty, rather than a collection of plant material that is going to start its decline in approximately 6 hours. The basket goes on your arm. It is heavy when it is full, heavier than it looks, and by the end of a full day of carrying it, the muscles in your left forearm will ache with the specific focused ache of muscles. that have been asked to do one thing for 12 hours and have opinions about this. You walk toward the Rue Saint-Honoré. This is where you begin, every morning. The Rue Saint-Honoré, which is the street of the tailors and the glove makers and the perfumers and the establishments that sell things that cost more per item than your father earned in a month before the English ruined everything. The people who walk on the Rue Saint-Honoré in the morning are people going somewhere with purpose. People wearing things that were purchased rather than made from the remains of things that wore out before them. People who've had breakfast and whose relationship to cold is adversarial rather than fundamental. These are the people who buy flowers. Not all of them. Most of them will walk past you without looking, because most people walk past flower girls without looking, because a flower girl in Paris is part of the furniture of the street, the same way the fountain is part of the street, the same way the beggars are part of the street, the same way the mud is part of the street. Noticed when absent, invisible when present. But some of them will buy. A man on his way to make a call will stop and take a bouquet of violets because he has a wife or a mistress or an aspiration to one or the other. A woman being carried in a sedan chair will signal to the bearers to stop and lean out and select carnations with the focused attention of someone making an important decision, and then will give you a coin that she will not look at before giving it, and that you will not look at until she is gone, because both of you understand that the looking at the coin is something done privately, on one's own time, and not in the moment of exchange. Violets, violets, fraîches de grâce, carnation, bouquet pour la belle dame. Your voice in the January air, making small clouds of steam with each word. You have a good voice for this. Not a beautiful voice, not a voice that will ever do anything in a theatre, but a voice that carries without straining, and that has the particular quality of sounding like it believes what it is saying, which is perhaps more important than beauty in a selling voice, because people buy from belief. The first sale comes at 7:15. A gentleman in a dark coat with good buttons who stops without you calling to him, looks at the violets, asks the price. You tell him 4 sous for the small bunch, 6 for the large, and gives you 5 without discussion, takes the large bunch and continues walking. 5 sous. Already. The morning is cooperating. This is the best moment of any selling day, the first sale. Before it, the morning is full of the anxiety of possibility, the knowledge that anything could happen, and some of it might be bad. After it, the morning has made a commitment. The morning has said, yes, I am a morning where things sell. You will carry this small affirmation with you through the next hour the way you carry warmth after a hot drink, carefully, aware that it will fade, trying to extend it by not using it up too fast. The Rue Saint-Honoré is filling up as the hour moves toward 8. The shops are opening their shutters with the specific clatter of winter wood in cold air. A boy is sweeping the step of a glover's establishment with the aggressive energy of someone who's been told the step must be swept and has decided to sweep it in a way that makes his feelings about this instruction clear. Across the street, outside a cafe that does not serve people like you but whose smell reaches you anyway, coffee and chocolate and the ghost of warm bread. 2 men in coats that cost more than your entire year's earnings are having a conversation that involves a lot of gesturing and lowered voices and the occasional glance up and down the street, which in Paris in 1787 is the specific body language of people discussing things that have political dimensions, and there are a great many such conversations happening in Paris in 1787, in cafes and on street corners and in print shops and in the back rooms of booksellers, because something is building in this city, something that nobody can quite see yet, but everybody can feel. The way you can feel a thunderstorm before you can hear it, in the pressure of the air and the particular quality of the silence. You do not think about this in these terms. You think, will the roses hold until noon, or will I need to discount them before the hour? You think, is the woman approaching the kind who stops or the kind who doesn't stop? You think, the blister on my heel is developing an opinion. The woman approaching stops. She's perhaps 35, dressed in the kind of clothes that are good without being ostentatious. The clothes of a bourgeois household that is doing well enough to spend on appearances, but not so well that it can afford to stop being careful. Her hair is neat under her cap. She has the purposeful walk of a woman who has errands and is intending to complete them on schedule. She looks at your basket with the particular evaluating look that women of this type give to flower baskets, which is the look of someone who knows what she wants and is determining whether what she wants is available, and at what quality, and at what price, and whether the price will be defensible at home. The violettes. How much for 2 bunches? 7 sous, madame. You'd been going to say 8, but there is something in her face that suggests 8 will require a negotiation that costs more in time and energy than the extra sou is worth. And time this morning is not something you can afford to spend on negotiations. 7 sous for 2 bunches of violettes de grace, which cost you about 3 sous wholesale, is still a profit of 4 sous on a transaction that takes 20 seconds. You can live with this, she considers. Not long. She was already considering when she stopped. The actual considering happened during the approach, and the hesitation now is simply the social form that purchase requires. The pause that says, I am a woman of substance making a considered decision, not a woman grabbing at flowers on the street. 7, she says, and opens her purse, and gives you a coin, and you make change from the small collection of sous you carry in your apron pocket, and the transaction is complete, and she's moved on before you have quite finished registering that it happened. 9 sous now, ahead of where you usually are at this hour. The morning is promising. Hold this carefully. Do not spend the promise. Madeleine is working the far end of the same street, which is the arrangement you've arrived at through the negotiation that takes place without ever being stated directly. The kind of negotiation that is really just both parties being aware of each other's needs and finding the arrangement that accommodates both. She's too far away to hear, but you can see her in the intervals between passing carts and horses. Her shawl, her basket, her particular way of standing that is not quite at ease and not quite at attention, this stance of someone who has learned to save energy in every position, because energy is a resource that does not replenish quickly when you eat what you eat and sleep how you sleep. The hours between 8 and 10 are the best hours. The street is full and moving, and the cold, though still present, has taken the edge off its argument. Somewhere above the roofline the sun exists, but is making a limited case for itself through the January overcast, offering light without warmth, like a fire that has all the right materials assembled but has not quite caught. You sell 3 more small bunches. A bunch of the lavender to an older woman who holds it to her nose and closes her eyes for a moment in the particular expression of someone who has been transported somewhere briefly by a smell, somewhere else, somewhere, with lavender growing in actual soil under actual sun, somewhere that is not the Rue Saint-Honoré in January, and then opens her eyes and is back, and she looks at you almost with accusation, as if the smell did something to her that she had not consented to. You make 15 sous by 9 o'clock. This is a good morning. It is during the good mornings that the other thing happens. When business is moving and your voice is finding its rhythm and the cold has become simply the temperature rather than a problem, when you are starting to believe in the day, This is when they come, the gendarmes, the inspectors of the lieutenancy of police, the men whose job it is to ensure that the streets of Paris are orderly, which in practice means ensuring that people like you have the right paperwork and are standing in the right place and are doing the right thing, or can be reasonably accused of not doing the right thing, which amounts to the same authority. The man who approaches you at approximately 9:30 is not in uniform, which is almost worse. Uniform means official, means documented, means there is a process. No uniform means informal, means discretion, means the outcome depends on what the man decides to decide, and what the man decides to decide depends on things you cannot control. He is perhaps 45, with the grey powdered wig of someone performing respectability, and the coat of someone whose respectability is not entirely secure. He has papers in his hand. Your stomach drops. Not into your feet, specifically into that hollow place just below your ribs, the hollow that opens every time someone with papers approaches you. Your license, he says. Not a question. Every street seller in Paris is supposed to have a license from the lieutenancy of police. Every flower girl is supposed to have paperwork proving that she is a flower girl and not something else. Not the kind of woman who uses flowers as a reason to stand on a street corner and talk to men, which is the category that the police have determined occupies the same street corners and carries the same baskets, and therefore must be distinguished from flower girls by documentation. The documentation costs money. You have it. You spent almost an entire week's profit on it in July, shortly after your aunt died, when you understood that without the protection of another person, and without the protection of paperwork, you were a girl on a street in Paris with no one standing between you and whatever the street decided to be. You produce the paper from inside your bodice, where it lives against your skin, because this is the only place you are certain it cannot be stolen or lost, and it is warm from your body and slightly damp at the fold, and you hand it to him and watch him read it with the expression of a man looking for something wrong, turning the paper slightly in the light, reading the date, reading the signature of the clerk who issued it. He gives it back. Your pitch, he says. This permits you to sell on the Rue Saint-Denis. You are on the Rue Saint-Honoré. Your stomach drops again, this time with more authority. This is the specific trap that has caught you before, and that you've been avoiding for months. The license specifies a street. The Rue Saint-Denis is a perfectly good street for selling, but it is not the Rue Saint-Honoré, and the Rue Saint-Honoré is where the money is, which is why you are here instead of there, which is exactly what he is pointing out, which is the mechanism by which the city extracts additional compliance from people who cannot afford to argue. You look at him, he looks at you. This is a negotiation. The Rue Saint-Denis license is all I could afford, you say. This is not an excuse, it is information. You are providing information. He considers you. You hold yourself very still, the way you have learned to hold yourself still in these moments. Not rigid, not frightened looking, just still. The stillness of someone who is present and not running, and has decided to let the moment resolve itself. You're not from Paris, he says. Rouen, you say. He looks at the paper again. The license was issued in July. My aunt died in July. I needed... You stop. He does not need to know about your aunt. He does not need to know anything. He needs to decide what he is going to do. Move to the Rue Saint-Denis by noon, he says. If I see you on this street again with that license, I'll take the license. He walks away. Your hands are shaking. You tuck them into the fold of your shawl so they are not visible. You stand there for a moment and breathe. 1 breath, 2 breaths. the way Madeleine showed you in the early weeks. Breathe until the shaking stops, because customers do not buy from shaking girls. Customers buy from girls who look like they know what they are doing, who look like they have always been exactly here, exactly this. The shaking stops, or mostly stops. Enough. You keep selling. The Rue Saint-Honoré for another hour. Then, before noon, you move. Because you always move. Because you always will move. Because the city sets the terms and you negotiate within them. This is what it means to be a flower girl in Paris in 1787. The flowers, the cold, the shaking hands, the moving when told to move, and the flowers again, always the flowers, sweet and dark and impossible and absolutely necessary. Because without the flowers you have nothing, and with them you have something, which is the entire distance between surviving and not. The Rue Saint-Denis in the afternoon is different from the Rue Saint-Honoré in the morning. Not worse, not better. Different in the way that two different languages for the same word are different, communicating approximately the same meaning through completely different sounds. The buyers here are less grand, more numerous. Artisans' wives, shop girls on their midday break, men who buy a single flower and carry it self-consciously, as if the flower is evidence of something about them that they are not entirely certain they wish to have as evidence. Small purchases, many of them, adding up in the calculation you're always running. How many sous so far? How many hours left? How many flowers left? What is the threshold I need to cross to pay for tonight's room and tomorrow morning's stock and still have something left over? You're at 23 sous when you see Madeleine again. She has moved to the Saint-Denis too, which means she was also on a restricted pitch this morning, which means you're not the only one who navigates this way, which is less comforting than it sounds, because what it actually means is that this is the water everyone is swimming in, and the swimming never stops. Madeleine is watching a group of men coming out of a print shop across the street. They have pamphlets in their hands, printed sheets that they are folding and tucking into coat pockets, with the practiced ease of people who've done this before. One of them is talking with considerable animation. Another is looking at the street around him with a kind of watchfulness that is not curiosity but surveillance. What is it, you ask when you reach her? Pamphlets, Madeleine says. She does not elaborate. In Paris in 1787, you do not need to elaborate. Pamphlets are everywhere. They appear from print shops and from the back rooms of booksellers and from under people's coats and in the spaces under the arches of the Palais Royal, which is the place where all the pamphlets eventually end up, which is the place where all the conversations about what is wrong with France eventually end up, which is the place that feels, in these months, like the centre of something being born or something dying, or possibly both. Are they trouble, you ask? Madeleine looks at you with the expression she uses when a question reveals exactly how much you still have to learn about Paris. Everything is trouble, she says. The question is whether it is trouble that affects us. This is true. Most of the trouble in Paris in 1787 is trouble that does not affect flower girls except in the specific ways that trouble affecting everyone eventually affects everyone. The Parlement refusing to register royal edicts, the King's Minister Calonne trying to push through tax reforms and failing, the assembly of notables meeting and arguing and going home again without resolving anything, the grain prices rising because the harvests have been bad and because someone somewhere is always speculating on grain prices the way other men speculate on wine or cloth or futures in the Indies. Grain prices are trouble that affect flower girls, because bread is what flower girls eat, when they eat, and bread has been getting more expensive since summer, and the queue outside the bakery on the Rue Saint-Denis this morning was longer than it was last week, which was longer than the week before. And the women in the queue have the specific kind of quiet that is not peace, but the conservation of energy for later. You keep selling. The afternoon is slower than the morning, always slower. The buyers thinner on the ground, more hesitant, more likely to look at your flowers and then look away and keep walking. You develop, over months of doing this, a specific sense for who will buy and who will not. Not a mystical sense, but a practical one, built from pattern. The woman who slows down but doesn't stop, probably not buying. The man who looks at the flowers and then at you, buying, but wants to feel like it was his idea. The old man who reaches into his pocket before he has even finished looking, buying without question, probably for a grave, probably not spending more than 2 sous, but buying, which is what matters. By 3 in the afternoon you have 31 sous. The basket is down to half full. The roses are beginning to say something with their outer petals that you do not want your customers to hear, a sort of drooping argument about time and temperature that you need to preempt. Roses, the last of the season's roses, mesdames. 3 sous for a beautiful bouquet, 3 sous only. The price is a lie in the sense that there is no last of the season. Roses come to Paris from somewhere or other most of the year, but it is a lie that creates urgency, and urgency sells, and if anyone challenges you on it, you will simply look confused and move on, because no one in the history of Parisian commerce has ever won an argument with a flower girl about where the flowers came from. You sell the roses. 2 bunches of 2 at 3 sous each. 37 sous now. The cold is working harder in the afternoon as the sun, such as it is, such as January permits it to be, begins its early retreat. Your feet in the sabots are numb in the specific way that is not frostbite, but is adjacent to frostbite. The way that means you should be stamping your feet periodically to remind them that they are attached to a living person who requires their participation in the continuing project of being alive. You stamp your feet. People look at you. You don't care. There is a conversation you have with your body every afternoon in winter, a negotiation between the part of you that would like to stop and the part of you that knows what stopping costs. Your hands are cracked at the knuckle where the cold has made the skin less flexible than skin wants to be, and the cracks sting when you close your fist, which you have to do every time you take coins, which you're doing approximately every 15 minutes on a good afternoon. You have a piece of tallow fat that you rub into the cracks at night, a small pot of it that Madeleine gave you in October, and that is almost finished. And the tallow helps in the short term, but the cold undoes it by morning, and so the cracked knuckles are a permanent feature of your hands from November to March, the physical record of each winter written into the skin. You're stamping your feet for the second time when a woman stops in front of you who you've seen before, 3 times before actually. She has a face that you remember because she has the specific face of a woman who's been beautiful and knows it, and has made her peace with the fact that the knowing and the having are beginning to diverge. She is perhaps 50, dressed in clothes that are expensive by the standards of the Rue Saint-Denis, but would not cause comment on the Rue Saint-Honoré. She always buys the violettes. She always buys the violettes, and she always pays without haggling, and she always looks at you for a moment too long. The way people look at street sellers when they're trying to figure something out about them that the transaction doesn't quite cover. Today she says, "You're always here." Not always, you say. Most days. Where do you sleep? This is a question that falls into a particular category of questions. The questions that mean something other than what they are asking, or that might mean something other, and you have to decide quickly which category this is. Near the market, you say? She nods. She buys the violettes. She pays 5 sous for the small bunch, which is one more than the asking price, and she doesn't wait for change. You watch her walk away and you think about the extra sous. Whether it is charity or habit or guilt or simply a rounding error, it doesn't matter. 5 sous is 5 sous, and the internal motivation of the person who gives it to you is their business. 42 sous now. You need 48 to pay for tonight's room, tomorrow's breakfast, and enough left over for tomorrow's flowers without depleting the small reserve you keep sewn into the hem of your dress, for the kind of emergency that Paris reserves the right to produce without warning. 6 sous. 6 more sous in the remaining hour of useful daylight. Madeleine is packing up. She sees you still working and raises an eyebrow. Not a question, just an acknowledgement that you are still working, which is the kind of acknowledgement between people who understand the same arithmetic. The Palais Royal, you call to her. Tomorrow morning, before the market, I want to try. Madeleine's expression does something complicated. The Palais Royal is not a place she recommends for a girl alone. The Palais Royal is the place in Paris where the rules are different, where the Duke of Orléans has essentially declared his gardens and arcades to be a free zone, exempt from the regular police authority that governs the rest of the city, which is wonderful if you are a bookseller with pamphlets that the censor would prefer not to exist, or a cafe owner who wants to stay open past curfew, or a man with money and the specific kind of appetites that money permits in spaces where the usual oversight has been suspended. For a flower girl, the Palais Royal is complicated. The flower sellers who work there do very well because the clientele is wealthy, and the wealthy spend money on flowers and on a great many other things they can acquire in the galleries without anyone asking too many questions. But the flower girls at the Palais Royal are also assumed, by a significant portion of the clientele, to be available for the kind of transaction that is not about flowers. This assumption is stated rarely and implied constantly, and navigating the implication is a skill that Madeleine has and that you are still developing. Tomorrow, Madeleine says finally, come with me. You nod. 6 sous. Come on. A young man, perhaps 20, in the coat of a clerk, the coat of someone who makes his living with documents and sitting and small careful handwriting, stops and looks at your lavender. He has the expression of someone who has just remembered something, the expression of a man who has been told to buy something and has just remembered that he was supposed to buy it an hour ago. Lavender, he says. How much? 3 sous, monsieur. He reaches into his pocket, pulls out a handful of coins, sorts through them with the specific anxiety of someone who does not quite know what he has, counts, gives you 3 sous, takes the lavender, says, thank you. Real thanks, not social thanks. He smells it immediately as he walks away. The small unconscious gesture of someone reacquainting himself with the fact of the thing he just bought. 45 sous. A woman with a child who looks at the flowers with the absolute focused desire of a 5-year-old who wants a thing. The mother says no initially, which is the standard opening position of mothers confronted with the desires of 5-year-olds and flowers. The 5-year-old says nothing, just looks. The pure, silent wanting of a child who knows that silence is its own argument. 1 sou, you say, for a small bunch of the narcissi, for the little one. This is not charity. This is strategy. The mother, given the option of 1 sou instead of 3, can say yes without revising her position on extravagance, and the 5-year-old gets the flowers, and you get 1 sou, and the mother feels like she has navigated this successfully. Everyone wins something. 1 sou, the mother says, and gives you 1 sou, and the child gets 3 narcissi, and the child holds them with both hands and with the utter solemnity of someone holding something that matters. 46. The light is going. The proper selling light. The light that makes faces visible and flowers visible and you visible enough to hail without effort. It is dropping out of the sky in the specific way of January, not gradually, but in the definitive way of days that have been short since November and have run out of patience for gradual. You sell the last of the violettes to a man who almost doesn't stop and then does, who takes the large bunch and gives you 6 sous and then seems unsure about whether he has given you the right amount and checks, and you let him check, and he's given you the right amount, and he takes the flowers and goes. 52 sous. You stand there in the gathering dark on the Rue Saint-Denis with an empty basket, and 52 sous in your apron pocket, and the blister on your heel has decided to be unmistakable, and your hands are a story about cold, and your back aches in the specific way that comes from carrying a weighted basket on one arm for 8 hours, and you feel, what? Not happy. Happy is a word for days that have more margin in them than this. Satisfied. No. Satisfied implies completion. Implies relief, maybe. The specific relief of having done the calculation enough times in the right direction that the day will close the right way, that tonight you will be warm enough and fed enough, and tomorrow you will be able to start again. That is enough. For to sight, that is enough. You walk back toward the Rue aux Ours. The lamplighters are beginning their rounds, men with long poles touching flames to the wicks of the street lanterns that hang at intersections, spreading pools of orange light that make the night more navigable and less honest. You pass a bakery. The bread from today's baking is gone, the window empty, but the smell is still there, the ghost of bread in the air around the door, and your stomach notices this before your mind does, issuing a complaint that is physical and immediate and not interested in your calculations about what 52 sous does and does not permit. 4 sous for the room. That leaves 48. 2 sous for the cabbage soup at the cook shop on the corner, which is not good but is hot and is food, in the way that the word food covers a very wide range of experiences. 10 sous into the hem reserve, because the reserve is low, and there are things that can happen in Paris that require 10 sous available immediately with no discussion. 36 for tomorrow's stock. Madame Torchon is in the entry hall when you arrive, in the way that landladies are always in the entry hall when you arrive, in the way that suggests a supernatural ability to be present at the moment of accountability. 4 sous, she says. She does not say good evening. She has never said good evening. You give her 4 sous. She puts them in her pocket without looking at them. The practiced gesture of a woman who has handled so many 4 sous transactions that her hands know what they are doing before her mind has committed to the act. There's soup, she says, if you want it. The soup at Madame Torchon's is a gesture toward hospitality that does not entirely succeed, but it is a gesture, and the cabbage in it is real cabbage, and it is hot, and you eat it standing at the table in the kitchen, because the kitchen is the warmest room in the building by virtue of the fire that must be maintained for cooking, and standing at a warm fire eating hot soup is, by the standards of what your life has become, quite good. Marie-Jeanne is already there, hands wrapped around a bowl, the day's lie smell somewhat diminished by proximity to the fire and to the smell of food. She nods at you. This is the greeting. Not so different from Madeleine's nod at 4 in the morning. The city of nods. How was it? She asks. 52 sous, you say. She says. Not dismissive. evaluative. Her own day involves a fixed wage rather than the variable arithmetic of selling, which she considers safer and you consider boring, and you are probably both right. Angelique is not there, which means Angelique is out, which means whatever Angelique does at night, Angelique is doing it. Sophie is there, silent as she has been for 3 days, eating soup with the mechanical attentiveness of someone who is keeping herself occupied so she does not have to think. You look at Sophie and think 8 months ago that was you. 8 months ago you were sitting in a kitchen eating soup and not thinking, because thinking was too large and the city was too large, and the distance between what you had expected and what you had found was a distance that thinking only made wider. You finish your soup, you go upstairs. The room is cold. You sit on your mattress in your dress and shawl, because undressing in this cold is a decision you say for the last possible moment, and you take off your sabots and look at your feet. The blister on the heel of your right foot has opened. This is what blisters do. They build themselves over the course of a day. They make their presence known at intervals throughout the day, and then in the evening they make their final statement. The sock is stuck to it. You peel the sock away carefully, which is a specific kind of pain that is familiar and expected and still specific, and you look at the blister, which is now a raw place the size of a copper sou. You press on it gently. You decide it is the kind of blister that will be worse for 3 days, and then will develop the calloused surface that means your foot has accepted this particular piece of information about what sabots do at the heel, and has adjusted. You darn the sock. It takes perhaps 20 minutes sitting on the mattress with the needle and thread you keep in a small case that belonged to your Aunt Hortense, and the darning is not as neat as you would like, because the light from the tallow candle on the floor is not much light, and your eyes are tired, and the movements of the needle are the careful movements of hands that have done a lot today, and are being asked to do one more precise thing. You put the sock back on. Sophie comes in. She lies down on her mattress without speaking. After a moment, it doesn't get better, does it? It is not a question. You think about what to say, about what is true and what is useful, and whether those two things are the same thing right now. It gets different, you say. You learn it. Learn what? Where to stand, what to say, who not to talk to. Sophie is quiet for a moment. That's not better. No, you admit. Not better. Different. She thinks about this. You think about it too, in the dark, with the candle burning low and the sounds of the building settling around you, and somewhere outside the sound of the street. Always the street. Paris not sleeping even when Paris is trying to sleep. I'm going to the Palais Royal tomorrow, you tell her, with Madeleine. If it goes well, there might be room for one more. Sophie doesn't answer immediately. Might, she says. Might, you agree. You blow out the candle. The dark comes in completely. Outside, somewhere down the Rue aux Ours, someone is singing, not well, the song of a person who is drunk enough to think singing's a good idea, and not so drunk that they have forgotten the words. The song continues for a while, and then does not continue. You close your eyes. The blister hurts. Your hands hurt. Your back says something considered about the day, and then becomes quiet. Tomorrow, the Palais Royal. Before that, the market. Before that, 4 o'clock, and the dark and the cold. You sleep. The Palais Royal before dawn is not the Palais Royal the world knows. The world knows it at 10 in the morning and at midnight, when the galleries are full and the cafes are roaring and the booksellers are doing business, from their little stands under the arcades, and the women who walk slowly and look at nobody in particular are doing the specific kind of business that the women who walk slowly and look at nobody in particular do. The world knows the Palais Royal as noise and light and the smell of coffee and the specific heat of 1,000 human bodies in an enclosed space. At 4:30 in the morning it is none of these things. At 4:30 it is a rectangle of sky above a rectangle of gardens in a rectangle of colonnades, and the gardens are frost-covered, the grass gone grey-white and crunching under your sabot as you follow Madeleine through the gap between the buildings, through the arch, into the courtyard. Even now there are people here, 2 men talking under the arcade on the far side, their breath making small synchronized clouds in the cold air, their voices too low to carry. A woman sweeping the stone flags of the gallery walkway, the brush making the same sound over and over, the sound of cold stone being persuaded to give up its dirt. A dog, fat and purposeful, trotting across the garden without looking at anything, going somewhere specific with the self-assurance of an animal that lives here and knows it. The flower stalls are here, Madeleine says, stopping near the southern side of the garden, near the arcade where the columns make shadows even in the darkness. She sets her basket down, in the morning before the galleries open. You set your basket down beside hers. The flowers you've bought this morning are different from yesterday's. Madeleine suggested the change. At the Palais Royal, she said, you sell expensive things, or things that look expensive, which is sometimes the same thing and sometimes not. At the Palais Royal, the customers have more money and less urgency. They are not stopping on their way somewhere. They are already somewhere. They are in the place they chose to be, and in the place they chose to be, they are susceptible to the transaction of desire, the purchase of things because the things are beautiful, and beautiful things make the people who purchase them feel, briefly, like the people they would prefer to be. So this morning's stock, better roses, the proper ones that come from somewhere warm where someone has made roses their specific project and has succeeded. Orange blossom from grass, small bundles tied with silk ribbon instead of the rough twist you use for the street bundles. Lily of the Valley, muguet, which is not in season but which the supplier at the Innocents sometimes has from hothouses somewhere south, and which at the Palais Royal will sell for twice what it sells anywhere else, because muguet is the flower of luck and beauty, and the kind of person who walks through the Palais Royal at 10 in the morning is the kind of person for whom luck and beauty are relevant commercial categories. You spent more on stock today, 18 sous instead of 11. The roses alone cost more than a full morning worth of street carnations. The light grows slowly, the sky above the courtyard shifting from black to dark blue to the grey blue of early morning in winter. The frost on the grass catches the light differently at each stage. At full dark it is invisible. At grey blue it begins to sparkle, not warmly, but precisely, the way crystals catch light rather than the way fire does. The first buyers will come at 8, Madeleine says. She's arranging flowers with her specific competence, the compensated hand working the roses into place with its 4.5 fingers. They are men who have been here since last night. Since last night, you repeat. Madeleine gives you the look she gives you when you say something that contains more innocence than Paris will permit. The Palais Royal never closes, she says. Not exactly. The galleries do, officially. But there are always people here. People who are here because there is nowhere else for them to be, or because they have found somewhere in the Palais Royal that is comfortable for being, and have decided to continue being there until morning makes itself unavoidable. You think about this, and they buy flowers. Men who've been out all night buy flowers for the women who will be up when they get home, Madeleine says. or for the women they're going to see when they leave here, or sometimes just for themselves, because a man who has spent all night in the Palais Royal sometimes decides, at 8 in the morning, that he needs something to demonstrate to himself that he is still the kind of man who buys flowers. This is more information about the Palais Royal and its night residents than Madeleine has previously volunteered, and you file it in the part of your mind that is devoted to the practical knowledge of Paris, the knowledge that is not in any book, but that determines whether you eat tomorrow. By 7:30 the arcades are beginning to fill, not with the main crowd, that will come later around 10 when the shops properly open and the cafes begin their day, but with the first arrivals, the people who come early because early is when they come, or because they have business that benefits from the relative quiet of early. The flower sellers appear. Madeleine knows 3 of them by name. The others she knows by sight and by pitch, the informal geography of the Palais Royal's commercial life, who stands where and how that determines who gets which customers. There is a woman called Celeste, who has been selling here for 9 years, and who therefore has a better pitch and a better reputation and better access to the type of customer who is returning rather than new, the customers who have a specific seller they have bought from before and will buy from again. Madeleine is adjacent to Celeste's territory, which means Madeleine's customers are the overflow, the ones Celeste's pitch doesn't capture. You are adjacent to Madeleine. This is how it works. Adjacency. You learn from proximity to the people who know more, and proximity costs you nothing except the acceptance that you are not yet the person with the best pitch. The first customer of the morning comes to Madeleine, not you. He is a man of perhaps 35 in last night's coat. The coat slightly wrong, slightly present, the way a coat is when it has been slept in, or when it has been worn through the hours that coats are not usually asked to cover. He buys roses without looking at them closely, gives Madeleine what she asks without negotiating, tucks the flowers under his arm and walks away in the direction of the Rue Saint-Honoré. What did she say to him? You ask Madeleine when he's gone. Nothing, Madeleine says. He didn't need anything said. This second customer comes to you, or rather he stops in front of you in the way that men stop in front of flower girls at the Palais Royal, which is not quite the way men stop in front of flower girls on the Rue Saint-Denis. It is a stopping that contains a specific evaluation, and you have been warned about this evaluation by Madeleine, and so you know how to meet it. Directly, professionally, with the basket visible and the flowers prominent, and your posture, the posture of someone engaged in straightforward commerce. He is perhaps 50. He has money, not the money of the old nobility, not the indifferent money of people who have always had it, but the money of a man who has made it and knows its value, which is the most dangerous kind of money because its owner tends to behave as if the having of it means the having of whatever the having of it can purchase. He looks at the muguet. Lily of the valley, you say. Out of season, from the south. 3 bunches left. How much for all 3? 15 sous. He looks at you. You look at the flowers. You have learned not to look back when a man looks at you in this specific way at the Palais Royal, because looking back opens a door that you would prefer to keep closed. Where are you from, he asks. Rouen, you say. To the flowers. You're young, he says. The flowers, you say, are 15 sous a beat. The Palais Royal continues around you, the arcades filling, voices in French and occasionally in other languages, English mostly. The English tourists are always here. They love the Palais Royal because the Palais Royal is the place in Paris that most resembles what they imagine Paris to be. Footsteps on stone, the smell of coffee beginning to reach you from the cafe at the far end of the arcade. He puts his hand in his coat pocket and produces 15 sous and puts them in your hand. and he takes the muguet and he goes. 15 sous in one transaction. On the street, 15 sous might take the better part of an hour to accumulate. You hold the money for a moment. Then you put it in your pocket. Well done, Madeleine says, not looking at you, looking at the man's retreating back with the expression she uses when she's watching something she has seen many times and has her own opinions about. What did he want, you ask, though you know what he wanted. He wanted what he paid for, Madeleine says, which is what he got. This is the Palais Royal. You learn this in the first morning. You learn the specific navigation of it, the way you can be here and be safe and be professional if you are clear about what you are selling and what you are not selling, and if the clarity is in your posture and in your eyes, and in the way you hold the basket and the way you look at the flowers when you don't want to look at the man. Most men, given clarity, accept it. They buy flowers. They go. The Palais Royal offers them enough other options that a flower girl who is actually selling flowers is not a significant frustration. Some men require the clarity to be stated more explicitly. Madeleine has handled 3 of these, in the first 2 hours, with a skill that is part expertise and part the authority that comes from being 42, and having handled this for 20 years and being, currently, the senior seller on this particular section of the arcade. Each time she handles it, she does it without drama, without anger, without the kind of scene that would require a gendarme or that would mark her as troublesome. She does it with a sentence or 2 delivered in a specific tone, and then the man goes. How do you do that? You ask her after the 3rd one. You tell them what the situation is, she says. Not angrily. Angrily suggests you care about their opinion. You just tell them, the way you'd tell someone the shop is closed, and then you look at the next person. What if they don't go? Madeleine is quiet for a moment. They always go, she says. Eventually. The thing they're looking for is not here, and they know it, and they go find it somewhere else. She pauses. But you carry something, she adds. A knife, not for using, for being the kind of person who has a knife. You look at her. Have you ever used it? You ask. She shows you her hand, the missing fingertip. Not for that, she says. For other things. The Palais Royal fills as the morning advances. By 10 it is everything Madeleine described. The noise and the crowd and the cafes and the booksellers and the conversations and the specific theatrical energy of a place that has decided to be both marketplace and forum and entertainment and political meeting and social display all at once. You sell flowers steadily, better than any morning on the Rue Saint-Denis, better than the Rue Saint-Honoré, except for the one day when a lieutenant's wife stopped and bought everything in your basket. You sell to a young man who blushes when you wrap the roses in paper, who is clearly buying them for someone to whom he has not yet said what he intends to say. An older woman who examines the orange blossoms with the particular attention of someone who knows what she's looking at, who asks about the supplier, who tells you that the orange blossoms from Grasse in 1783 were better than anything since, and who buys 2 bunches and says so in the way of a compliment. A pair of English tourists who speak to each other in English and to you in French, that is so clearly translated from English in real time that you can almost hear the effort of it, who find the whole transaction delightful in the specific way that English tourists find French transactions delightful, as if the exchange of coins for flowers is itself a charming cultural performance rather than commerce. You sell to a man who introduces himself, who says he is a journalist for a pamphlet. He says it the way other men say they're lawyers, with a certain professional gravity, who asks if he can write about the flower sellers of the Palais Royal. who says he's writing about the lives of the working people of Paris, and who, when you look at Madeleine, receives from Madeleine the expression that suggests he should probably move on. Why not, you ask Madeleine after he has gone. Because being in a pamphlet is being noticed, she says, and noticed is what we don't need to be. This too goes into the file of practical knowledge. The city of Paris in 1787 is a city in which visibility is a complicated resource. More of it can mean more customers. More of it can also mean more of the kind of attention that results in a gendarme and a question about your license. By noon you have made 43 sous at the Palais Royal. 43 sous in a morning, against the 37 you made in a full day on the street yesterday. The mathematics of this are clear. Can I come again tomorrow? You ask Madeleine. She considers. Not the question, the answer to the question, which she has already worked out. She is deciding how to phrase the answer. There are rules, she says, at the Palais Royal, not the police's rules, our rules, the rules of the cellars. She tells you the rules. They take perhaps 5 minutes to explain, and a much longer time to understand properly, and you understand them partially now, and will understand them more fully as you live within them over the following weeks. The rules concern pitch seniority, and which suppliers are acceptable, and what you can and cannot claim about your flowers, and how you handle the specific category of customer who believes the Palais Royal's freedom extends to more than shopping. The rules also concern what you do when a fight starts in the arcade, which happens with a frequency that the Palais Royal's daytime elegance would not suggest. And they concern what you do when someone in the crowd is grabbed by their collar by someone who is clearly not a customer and is clearly intending violence, which also happens because the Palais Royal's freedom from police authority means it is also a place where private disputes are settled in ways they cannot be settled on regulated streets. The rules are the lived physics of this particular space. You learn them the way you've learned everything about Paris, by listening to the people who've been here longer, and by paying attention to the moments when attention is required. In the cafe nearest to your pitch, a man is speaking to a group of perhaps 20 people gathered around his table. Not loudly. The speech is controlled. The voice of someone who is making an argument that is not quite permitted to be made at full volume. You can catch words but not sentences. You catch the king. You catch bread. You catch the debt. You catch a word that might be revolution or might be resolution. The acoustics of the arcade are not helpful. 20 men listening, nodding. Later, much later, years later, if you're still alive and still in Paris and still able to think back to this January, you will understand that this is what these weeks were. This is the moment you were in and did not know you were in. The moment before everything. The men in the cafes arguing about pamphlets, the bread prices rising, the king's ministers trying to fix a financial system that was broken in ways the financial system itself could not repair, and underneath all of it, in the bread queues and in the Garni rooms, the building pressure of 800,000 people who are not getting enough to eat, and who are being told by the men in the cafes and the pamphlets that this was not an accident, that this was a choice, that someone had chosen this for them. You do not think in these terms. You think, the roses are down to 2 bunches, and I should keep the better one for the end of day when the buyers with the most money come through. You think, my feet hurt. You think, 43 sous is extraordinary for a morning. Let me not ruin it by making a mistake in the afternoon. You sell the last flowers at 4 o'clock to a woman who smells of expensive perfume and who buys the remaining muguet without asking the price, who gives you a coin that turns out to be 10 sous, who is already walking away before you can say anything, who may have made a mistake or may simply be the kind of person for whom 10 sous is not worth calculating about. 64 sous in one day. You're extraordinarily careful on the way home, more careful than usual, moving through the streets with your hand near your apron pocket and your eyes on the people around you, because 64 sous is not an amount you can afford to lose. You make it home without incident. You eat, you sleep, you wake at 4. The weeks pass in the specific way that hard weeks pass, not quickly, not slowly, but with the grinding regularity of days that are all made of the same materials arranged in different orders: cold, market, flowers, streets, coins, cold again. The body adjusts to the rhythm, or rather the body has no choice but to adjust. The body is a practical instrument that works with what it has been given, and what it has been given is 4 o'clock mornings and 8 hours of standing, and the weight of a basket and the cold that comes up through the wood of the sabots no matter how much straw you stuff into them. February comes. The cold does not leave. February in Paris in 1787 will be remembered as one of the coldest on record. A winter that begins early and ends late, and produces in between a catalogue of weather events that Paris has no precedent for handling. The Seine freezes. Not entirely, not solidly enough for the frost fairs that sometimes happen on the Thames in London, but enough to slow the river traffic, enough that the barges carrying wood and grain and coal from upstream arrive late or not at all, enough that the price of firewood in the Faubourg Saint-Antoine goes up by a third in a week, and the queues outside the wood merchants' yards are longer than the queues outside the bakeries, which is saying something, because the queues outside the bakeries are already extraordinary. You notice the queues before you understand what they mean. They are longer in February than they were in January, not gradually longer, suddenly longer, as if overnight someone moved the beginning of the queue back by 20 people, and then the next day moved it back by 20 more. You pass them on your way to the market, the women waiting in the dark outside the bakeries, and the darkness and the cold give the queues a specific quality that is different from the queues you have seen before, a quieter quality, a quality that is not resignation exactly, but is something adjacent to it, the specific silence of people who've been waiting for a very long time and have run out of the energy for the kind of outrage that waiting deserves. The bread price is 14 sous for a £4 loaf. This is the number that Madeleine says to you one morning in February as a statement, the way you state a fact that has no commentary available to it, a fact that is simply the fact, sitting there. 14 sous. When you arrived in Paris in the spring, it was 8. In July, 10. In November, 12. Now, February, 14. A day labourer earns perhaps 25 sous a day. In summer. In winter there is less work, and 14 sous for bread means that on a bad day a working man in Paris spends more than half of what he earns on bread alone, before the cost of anything else enters the calculation. You think about this while you arrange your basket at the Marché des Innocents in the cold, in the dark. You think about it because thinking about it is the only thing you can do with it. You cannot change the price of bread. You cannot change the weather. You can note the fact of 14 sous and file it with the other facts about Paris that make up the specific education this city has been giving you in the subject of how a city can be beautiful and brutal in equal measure. The flowers are more expensive too. Not catastrophically more expensive, but enough. The price of transport rises when roads freeze. The price of labour rises when labour is scarce, or when the workers are not well enough fed to work the same hours. The flowers that cost you 12 sous in November cost 14 now, which means your margin is tighter than it was, which means the calculation of each day becomes more precise. Madeleine does not complain. Complaining is not something Madeleine does in front of you, or perhaps at all. You have never seen Madeleine complain, which is either evidence of extraordinary equanimity or evidence that she has made a decision at some point in the 20 years that complaining is a use of energy that has never produced a satisfactory return. The spring will come, she says once in early February, when the cold is particularly absolute, and the flowers that have been travelling from the south have arrived frozen and half dead, and nearly unusable. She says it not as comfort, but as information. How long, you ask? March, she says. Late March, maybe April. You think about late March, about April, about the number of days between February and April and what those days will cost. The spring will come, you say to yourself, more than to Madeleine. She nods. This is the nod that means yes, and you will be here when it does, and that will matter. There is a day in February, a Saturday, which you know because the market is busier on Saturdays, when the mood of the city shifts in a way you feel before you understand it. You're at the Palais Royal by 9, your pitch set, your basket balanced on the stone of the arcade ledge where it sits between buyers. The morning crowd is its usual self. The men from last night's carousing, moving through with the specific, purposeful avoidance of eye contact. That is the morning after effect of the Palais Royal's night population. The early shoppers, the newspaper readers in the cafe, the booksellers laying out their stock under the arcades. The pamphlets this morning are different. Not different in kind. There are always pamphlets. But different in volume and in the urgency with which they're being passed around. 3 men come through the arcade in the space of 20 minutes, each of them carrying papers that they hand to people they seem to know, not selling them, giving them, and the people who receive them read immediately, standing, which is not how pamphlets are usually read. Madeleine is watching. What's happened, you ask? Someone will tell us, she says. Someone does. A young man, he looks like a student. The age and the coat and the ink on his fingers are all student. Stops near your basket and buys a bunch of violettes for 2 sous. And while he is counting the sous, he says, without preamble, the grain merchant on the Rue du Temple has been storing. You look at him. Storing, you repeat. Since October. He has a warehouse, 3 warehouses. While the city starves, he has been storing grain and waiting for the price to go up. The young man counts the sous. He gives them to you. He doesn't take the violettes. He forgets to take the violettes. He walks away, and you stand there holding the violettes and the 2 sous and the sentence he has left behind. Grain stored in warehouses while the price rises, while the bread queues lengthen, while the women stand in the dark at 4 in the morning waiting for a loaf of bread that cost 14 sous. This is not new information exactly. The accusation of grain hoarding has been circulating since autumn, in the pamphlets and in the conversations in the Garni, and in the bread queues where the women talk quietly about who is responsible for this. Whose decision it is that bread should cost 14 sous, whose profit it is that the grain should be somewhere other than in the bread that is not being made because the flour is not available because the grain is in a warehouse. But something about today makes the information different, hotter. By noon, the Palais Royal has changed register. The usual noise is louder, or differently loud. The difference between the noise of people enjoying themselves and the noise of people excited, and underneath the excitement, you can hear something that is not quite fear, but is adjacent to it, the sound of a crowd that has not yet decided what it is going to do. You sell steadily through the noon hour. The buyers are distracted. More than one person stops, looks at your flowers, does not buy, looks at something across the garden, moves on. Distracted buyers are not your preferred buyers. You prefer the buyers who are completely present, whose attention is on the transaction, who have already decided to buy and simply need the mechanism of exchange to complete the decision. By 1 o'clock the garden is very full, and the conversations are very loud, and you can see, on the far side of the arcade, a group of men standing on something, a chair, a table, and speaking to the crowd gathered around them. The words don't reach you, but the response of the crowd does. The periodic surge of sound that means the speaker has said something that the crowd wants to say back at him. "We should go," Madeleine says. You look at her basket. She has flowers left. "Now?" you ask. "Now," she says. You pack your basket. You have 49 sous and some unsold flowers, and the specific practical regret of leaving business behind. Madeleine is already moving, basket on arm, walking toward the gate that opens onto the Rue Saint-Honoré. With the calm deliberateness of a woman who has seen things escalate and has developed strong opinions about the advisability of being in the right place when they do. You follow her out through the gate. The Rue Saint-Honoré is busier than usual, people moving in both directions with the sort of lateral urgency that means something is happening somewhere, and different people have different ideas about which direction to be going in relation to whatever is happening. "What will they do?" you ask Madeleine. "What hungry people always do," she says. She turns south, away from the Palais Royal, away from the gathering noise. What hungry people always do. You walk behind Madeleine and think about this. You know what hungry people do because you have been hungry and you know what you do. You find food, or you find money for food, or you find someone who has food, and you make yourself useful to them. This is what you do. This is what Marie-Jeanne does. This is what Sophie, when she finally decided what to do with herself, does. She found work in a laundry, 3 sous a day, enough to eat if the bread doesn't go above 14. But there is another kind of hungry, the kind you have not personally experienced yet, but that you can see, building in the bread queues and in the conversations you overhear, and in the faces of the people whose patience for individual solutions has run out, who have arrived at the understanding that the problem is not individual, and therefore the solution cannot be individual. The kind of hungry that becomes collective, that stops being each person's private problem and becomes everyone's shared refusal. What hungry people always do. You find out by nightfall what they did. The grain merchant on the Rue du Temple, the one with the warehouses, had his windows broken. A crowd gathered and broke the windows and pushed through the door and took the grain and the flour and the bread that he'd been storing and carried it away into the Faubourg Saint-Antoine where the people were hungriest. And the merchant ran, and the gendarmes came too late, and the grain was already gone, distributed in the specific informal way of crowds that have decided to distribute things. This is what Angélique tells you when she comes back that evening, eyes bright, still carrying the smell of the street mob. Not an unpleasant smell exactly, just the smell of many bodies in motion, of sweat and cold air, and the particular electricity of collective action. "Did you see it?" she says. She's speaking to all of you. You and Marie-Jeanne and Sophie, who are eating the cabbage soup in the kitchen. "I was at the Palais Royal," you say. "We left before it started." Smart, Angélique says. But she says it in the way that suggests she finds smartness less interesting than what she saw. "The merchant's wife was screaming," she says. And someone said that he had enough grain stored in those 3 warehouses to feed the Faubourg for a month. A month! While they've been queuing every morning since October. Marie-Jeanne says nothing. She's eating soup with the focused efficiency of a woman who is tired. Is it true, you ask? The warehouses? I saw one of them, Angelique says, from the outside, after. She pauses. The door was open. It had been a warehouse. There were marks on the floor where sacks had been stacked. You think about this. 3 warehouses, October to February. 4 months of stored grain while the bread price climbed from 10 sous to 14. Someone will come after them, Marie-Jeanne says finally. The gendarmes. They'll find out who was there. Who was there? Angelique says. Half the faubourg was there. Half the faubourg can't all be arrested, Sophie says. She has said barely anything for 2 weeks, and this sentence, delivered quietly, is received with a kind of general surprise, the way a quiet person's words are sometimes received with more attention than the words warrant. No, Madeleine says. She's appeared at the kitchen door without anyone noticing her arrival. She's still in her shawl, still carrying her basket, which means she just arrived. But some of them will be. The ones who were visible. The ones who spoke. The ones who were in front. She looks at you. You did right to leave, she says. You feel 2 things at once about this statement. Relief and something that is not quite guilt, but is adjacent to guilt. The feeling of having been safe in a situation where safety required choosing not to be in the place where the choosing was happening. Could we have stopped them, you ask? Madeleine looks at you with the expression of a woman who has spent 42 years not wasting time on questions that have no useful answer. Go to sleep, she says. Tomorrow is the market. March arrives the way Madeleine promised it would. Late and reluctant and still cold, but with a different quality of cold. The cold of something ending rather than the cold of something with no intention of ending. The difference is subtle. The air still bites. The mud is still the particular mud of Paris in winter, which is the mud of 800,000 people, and their animals and their waste and their discarded things, churned daily by the wheels of the city's carts into a substance that is less mud and more the physical record of urban life accumulated in the street. But there is something in the light that was not there in February, a quality of angle and duration, a suggestion that the sun is resuming its responsibilities. The flowers change with the light. By mid-March, the suppliers at the Innocent have stock that was not available a month ago. The first violets of the new season, smaller and more intensely coloured than the ones that come from the south in winter. The ones that grow in the gardens of the Ile-de-France, where the soil is cold and the flowers are correspondingly fierce. Snowdrops, finished now, but replaced by the first crocuses, and muguet, real muguet, not the hothouse muguet of February, beginning to appear in the stalls, which means the season is turning, which means the moment Madeleine marked on the calendar in your head when she said late March has arrived. Spring muguet at the Palais Royal sells for more than anything you have sold all winter. Not dramatically more. Paris is not a city that permits dramatic changes in the fortunes of flower girls, but enough more to matter. You sell 8 bunches in a single morning in the 3rd week of March at 4 sous each, which is 32 sous in 3 hours, which is the best 3 hours you have had since you arrived in the city. You stand in the arcade at noon and count the coins and feel something that is not happiness, but is the thing that lives next to happiness, when happiness cannot quite afford the room. Good morning, Madeleine says, not question. 32 sous, you say. She nods. The nod that means yes, and hold on to that, and don't assume it will last and be glad it happened. This is Madeleine's particular genius. She knows which things to be glad about and which things to be cautious about, and she knows how to be glad and cautious at the same time, which is a skill that requires practice, and that the city of Paris provides ample opportunity to develop. The Palais Royal in spring is different from the Palais Royal in winter. The gardens bloom, not magnificently. The gardens of the Palais Royal are not Versailles, are not even the Tuileries, but enough. The chestnut trees that line the inner rectangle put out their first pale green in March, and by April they are properly leafed, and the leaves give the garden a quality of enclosure and privacy that it does not have in winter, when everything is bare and visible. The cellars under the arcades get afternoon shade in summer, which is a quality they value in July, the way they value afternoon sun in January, as a resource, as a gift from the geometry of the building. The people who come to the Palais Royal in spring are also different. The winter crowd is a more desperate crowd. People using the Palais Royal for warmth and company, and the specific comfort of being somewhere that is not the streets, that has coffee and light and human noise and the feeling of participation in something, even if the something is only the ongoing social experiment of Paris in the late 18th century. The spring crowd has more leisure in it, more tourism. The foreign visitors, the English, always the English, but also Germans, Italians, Dutch merchants, the occasional group of Americans who examine Paris with the specific expression of people from a new country looking at an old one and trying to figure out what is a model and what is a warning. You sell to all of them. You develop over these spring months a small repertoire of phrases in English, not sentences, not conversation, words, the names of flowers, numbers, the word beautiful, which is a word that sells flowers in any language because the selling of flowers is always, ultimately, the selling of beauty, and the word in the buyer's own language does the work that translation cannot. Beautiful, you say to the English tourists, holding up a bunch of roses, and they laugh, pleased by this, pleased by the specific delight of being addressed in their own language by a French flower girl on a spring morning in Paris. And they buy the roses and they give you more than you asked, and they walk away talking to each other in English about the flower girl. And you know, without understanding the words, that they are being charmed, because being charmed is what they came to Paris to be, and you have given them the thing they came for. This is the commerce of charm. It is different from the commerce of necessity, which is what you practice on the Rue Saint-Denis in January. The commerce of charm requires you to understand what the buyer wants beyond the object they are purchasing, what feeling they want to carry away from the transaction, what version of themselves they want to be for the 20 seconds of the exchange. Give them that feeling and they will pay what you ask and leave glad. Give them only the object and they will pay what they must and leave indifferent. Madeleine does not put it this way. Madeleine says, people buy from warmth. And she is right, and that is the shorter version of the same thing. The weeks of spring pass and you are still here. You've not been arrested. You've not been sick beyond a cold in February that cost you 4 days of selling and nearly wiped out the reserve in your hem. You have not been robbed. Though one morning in April you felt a hand near your apron pocket in the crowd at the Innocents, and you turned around and there was no one there, which means either the hand belonged to a very skilled thief who decided the pocket was not worth continuing, or the hand belonged to an innocent person who was simply standing too close, and you do not know which. And the not knowing is its own kind of lesson. You are learning Paris, the specific way one learns a city that is indifferent to your learning it, that does not adapt itself to your pace or your comfort or your level of readiness, that simply continues being what it is and leaves you to develop whatever understanding you can in whatever time you have available. Notre Dame is where you go on the Sunday in April when Madeleine says without explanation, "Take the morning." Just those 3 words, "Take the morning," which means the pitch will hold without you. Go somewhere you've earned it. You walk south across the Pont au Change to the Île de la Cité, the island at the heart of Paris that was Paris before Paris was Paris, the first settlement, the ground from which the city grew outward in every direction over 1,500 years. The stones of the island are old in the way that only things in very old cities are old, not the presentable oldness of things that have been maintained and cleaned and presented for viewing, but the oldness of things that have simply continued to exist past the point where continuation is remarkable. Notre Dame stands at the eastern end of the island. You have seen it from the bridges, seen its towers above the roofline of the city, seen it from the river when you crossed on boats in the early weeks when crossing by boat was still a novelty. But you've not been inside it yet. You've been in Paris for 9 months, and you've not been inside Notre Dame. This is the thing about Paris that nobody tells you before you come. The monuments of Paris are backdrop. They're present in the way that the sky is present, always there, always visible at the right angle, but not the thing you are looking at, because what you are looking at is the cobblestone directly in front of your sabot, and the coins in the hand of the buyer in front of you, and the flowers in your basket, and the cloud moving to suggest it might rain, and whether you can sell 5 more bunches before it does. The monuments of Paris are for people who have time to look at monuments. You have been, for 9 months, a person who does not have time. Today you have time. The cathedral is bigger than you understood from the outside. This is always the thing with Notre Dame. From the river, from the bridges, from a distance. It is enormous. Yes, one of the largest churches in France. 2 towers each rising 220 feet above the island. A facade so detailed that you could spend a week on it and still be finding new things. From a distance you understand that it is large. From inside you understand something different, that it was built to be the largest thing you had ever been inside, that the height of the nave and the darkness of the transepts and the light through the rose windows, the great west window and the 2 transept windows, each more than 40 feet across, each assembled from pieces of glass so old that the colour has deepened into something that is less like glass, and more like something between glass and something else, something that is doing what glass cannot quite do, which is to be simultaneously transparent and present. That all of this was designed by people who understood that making a building this large and this old, and this full of light, was a way of making an argument about the nature of the world, and that the argument still holds 800 years after the argument was first made, even in a city that is currently having a very loud argument about bread prices and the rights of the Third Estate, and whether the king has the authority that the king has always claimed to have. The argument of Notre Dame is not about kings, it is about something older than kings. You stand in the nave with your basket on your arm and your sabot on the stone floor that has been walked on since 1163, when they first began to build this place, when the city above the ground looked nothing like what you know, when the Île de la Cité was a congestion of houses and markets, and the smell of the river, which it still is, but the buildings around it now are different, and the people inside them are different, and the things they are arguing about are different, though the argument about bread was probably happening in 1163 too. The candles on the altar are lit. A few people are here, kneeling, praying, or simply sitting with the specific stillness of people who have come here, because this is the one place in the city where the noise cannot follow. The light through the rose windows moves as the clouds move outside. The colours on the floor brightening and dimming, the blue and the red and the gold shifting across the stone in slow patterns. You sit down in one of the chairs near the back. This is the first time you've sat down, not to eat or sleep or mend a sock, in 9 months. You sit there for a long time. There is a cough from somewhere near the altar. The distant sound of the river, muffled by the stone walls but not entirely excluded. The smell of the candles, tallow and beeswax both, mixing with the deep, cold smell of stone that has been stone for 600 years. The smell of damp and age and the compressed history of everything that has happened in this place. The coronations, the burials, the prayers of ordinary people who stood where you are sitting and asked for things that were not always given. You think about your Aunt Hortense, not with the sharp grief of July, which is gone now, which has become something more manageable, something you can carry without dropping. You think about her the way you think about things that are over, with the specific tenderness of memory, the way memory smooths the difficult parts without erasing them entirely. She would have liked this, the light through the windows, the quiet. She would also have told you to stop sitting and get back to work. Both of these things are true about Hortense. You stay until the quarter-hour bell rings and you're afraid of losing the morning entirely, and then you get up and you go back into the city, and the city is waiting for you exactly as you left it, unchanged, indifferent, enormous, going about its business in the specific way it always does and always will. The thing about Paris in spring of 1787 is that it is beautiful. This needs to be said because it is true and because it is easy to forget in the telling of the bread prices and the pamphlets and the cold and the police inspectors and the calculations of sous and the cracked knuckles. It is easy to forget that Paris in April is one of the most beautiful places in the world, and that the beauty is not diminished by the poverty, and the poverty is not diminished by the beauty, and both of these things are completely real and completely present simultaneously, which is perhaps the most specifically Parisian thing about Paris. The chestnut trees along the boulevards are in bloom. The blossom comes in vertical spires, white and pink, and the smell of it is extraordinary, a sweetness that cuts through the city's other smells and wins, briefly. The daily olfactory argument of Paris, though the argument resumes the moment you move away from the chestnuts and back into the streets, where the argument has been going on since 1163, and will continue until someone invents something that Paris has not yet imagined. The flowers at the Innocents are spectacular. The spring stock from the south arrives now in quantity. The roses that are properly in season, the peonies, the iris, the first straw flowers, and the market in the mornings has a quality that the winter market did not have, a quality of bounty, of things being genuinely available rather than wrested from the cold and the distance. You spend 20 sous on your stock the first Wednesday of April and come home with 61 sous and roses left over, which you put in the water jar on the windowsill because throwing flowers away is something you cannot bring yourself to do. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. The roses on the windowsill fill the room with the smell of the south. Marie-Jeanne comes in and stops when she smells it and says nothing, just stands there for a moment with her eyes closed, and then says, "My grandmother grew roses." "Where?" you ask. "Burgundy," she says. "She had a wall, a whole wall, south-facing. In June it was covered." You look at her. Marie-Jeanne from the Marais laundry. Marie-Jeanne of the lye smell and the efficient eating and the minimal communication. Marie-Jeanne who has a grandmother in Burgundy with a south-facing rose wall. "What happened?" you ask. "Why did you come to Paris?" She looks at the roses. The same as everyone, she says. There wasn't enough. This is the story. This is always the story in this building, in this city. Not enough in the place you are from, so you came here, where there is more of some things and less of others, and you navigate the gap between the things you have more of and the things you have less of, and you try to make that navigation add up to a life. You think about this. Every person in this building, in this garni, in this quarter, in this city, every one of them came from somewhere that had less, or was pushed out of somewhere that had enough. The weaver's daughter from Rouen, the laundry woman from a village in Burgundy, the girl from the Loire with the quiet eyes who now works long days in someone else's water and someone else's soap. All of them here because the places they were from could not hold them. And here, in the centre of everything, in the largest city in France and one of the largest in the world, selling flowers so that the people who have enough can demonstrate this fact to each other in the currency of beauty. It is an arrangement that makes a certain kind of sense if you don't think too hard about it. You put the roses back in the water. The summer comes. And when I say summer comes to Paris in 1787, I need you to understand what that means in a city where the infrastructure for summer has never been designed to work. The heat arrives in June and does not leave until September, and between June and September it does things to Paris that Paris was not built for. The Seine drops. The mills on the river slow when the water level falls below the height that turns the wheels efficiently, which means the flour mills slow, which means the flour becomes scarcer, even before you factor in the harvest that everyone is already watching with the concentrated anxiety of people whose dinner depends on what the weather does between now and August. The smell changes. The specific summer smell of Paris is something you were warned about and did not quite believe until you experienced it, because nothing you were warned about quite captures it. It is the river, yes, at low water, giving up its cargo of 800,000 people's waste with the generosity that heat encourages from things that would rather keep their contents to themselves in cooler weather. It is the tanneries, the gut cleaners, the charnel houses, the midden heaps in the alleys between buildings, the summer accelerating every process of decay that the city's biological life requires. It is also, underneath all of this, the smell of human effort in heat. The laundresses, the stevedores, the men who move things across the city on their backs and their shoulders and their carts, the women who stand at open fires cooking the food of the households that can afford cooks. All of this biological work happening in July heat without the benefit of drainage or ventilation or any of the systems that a later age will take for granted. You work in this. Every day, you carry your basket through streets that are alive with the smell of what summer does to Paris, and you sell flowers, and the flowers in the heat last even less time than they last in winter, which means your calculations have to be even more precise, which means you have to sell faster and discount more and throw away less, which is the arithmetic of the season, which you have now done for a full year, and which you know as well as you know anything you have ever known. You know it in your body. The specific speed at which carnations in July heat go from fresh to frankly not fresh is now a thing you can feel in the air without touching the flowers. The way a peony's petals begin to separate 2 hours before the separation is visible, you can see it now in a way you could not see it in April. The particular colouring of a rose's outermost petals that precedes their curling by approximately 45 minutes, long enough to discount them if you haven't been paying attention, not long enough if you have been paying attention to something else. This is knowledge, real knowledge. the kind that belongs to you entirely, that nobody can take away or license away, or order you off the pitch away from. It is yours, and you have paid for it in the currency of the summer's heat, and the winter's cold, and the blistered heel, and the cracked knuckles, and the hundreds of calculations run in your head while standing on a street corner watching people walk past your basket. Madeleine watches you work in July the way she does not need to watch you anymore, because you do not need to be watched. She is selling at her pitch, you are selling at yours, and occasionally you exchange information. That suppliers' roses are overpriced this week. The gendarmes have been checking pitches since Thursday. There is a group of English nobility staying at the Hôtel de Bourbon, and they are buying flowers in quantities that suggest someone is hosting something. And occasionally you eat a piece of bread together in the midday lull. And this is what working together looks like when the work has been worked out and the rules have been absorbed, and what remains is just the doing of it, day after day, the endless repetition that's not monotony but is the texture of a life. "Do you ever think about leaving?" you ask Madeleine one afternoon in July, eating bread in the shade of the arcade. She chews, considers. "Leaving Paris?" "Yes." "To go where?" You do not have an answer to this. This is the question that always stops the thought of leaving, because leaving Paris requires going somewhere, and the somewhere is the part of the plan that never fully forms. You cannot go back to Rouen. The something that was not enough in Rouen is still not enough. You could go somewhere else, some other city, some smaller town, but smaller towns have flower sellers already. Smaller towns have their own economies of survival, into which another flower girl would insert herself at the bottom, which is where you would insert yourself here if you left and came back, which is another way of saying that leaving has a cost that you calculate every time you think about it, and that cost is always higher than the benefit you can see from this distance. "Nowhere to go," you say finally. "No," Madeleine says. "That's what I thought." She finishes her bread. "I thought about it at your age," she says. "I was going to go to Lyon. My cousin was there. She said there was work in the silk trade. A girl could earn 3 sous a day winding thread. 3 sous a day." She looks at the arcade, the summer crowd moving through it. "I stayed in Paris instead. I don't know if that was right." "Is your cousin still in Lyon?" "She's dead," Madeleine says. "Not sadly, factually. Fever a few years ago. So who can say?" You sit with this for a moment. The bread in your hand. The July heat, which is becoming the fact of existence rather than a condition within existence, the way all persistent conditions become eventually. "Madeleine," you say, "how many years more will you do this?" She looks at you. The look she gives when you have asked something that deserves a real answer. "As many as I need to," she says, and then, after a moment, "Don't let the city make that a sadder sentence than it is." You think about this for the rest of the afternoon. Don't let the city make that a sadder sentence than it is. The city wants it to be sad. The city is structured to make the sentence sad. The city's entire economic logic says, you will do this as long as you need to because you have no choice. And the having no choice is the sad part. But Madeleine is saying something else. She is saying, the needing to is real, and the doing of the thing you need to do is not in itself the sad part. The sad part is the seeing of it from outside, from the position of someone who thinks it is sad. From the inside, it is just work. It is just the day. It is just the flowers and the cold and the coins and the warmth and the things that are enough and the things that are not enough and the ongoing negotiation between the two. She is right. You know she is right. You still do not entirely believe her, but you know she is right, and the gap between knowing something and believing it is something you are working on, and working on it is, in itself, a form of progress. The summer of 1787 is not a good summer for France. The harvest is bad, not catastrophically bad, not the harvest of 1788, which will be the worst in a generation, and which will break something in the country that does not get put back together, but bad enough. The grain stored in the merchants' warehouses is less than it was last year. The price of flour is creeping upward even in July, when prices should be lower because grain is newly available. And when prices creep upward in July, it means they will be moving with more confidence by October. And by November, they will be at a price that the winter bread queues will make their silent argument about again. You know this in the abstract. You know it the way you know things that you've absorbed from conversations overheard and pamphlets glanced at, and the general tenor of the city's mood, which is the mood of a city that is paying attention to its own hunger, with the focused alertness of a body that knows something is wrong and has not yet determined what to do about it. What you know in the specific is this. In the second week of August, the woman you've been buying narcissi from at the Innocents tells you her supplier has raised his price, and she is passing the increase along. And the increase is 2 sous per lot, which means your margin on narcissi is 2 sous thinner than it was, which means you sell narcissi at a loss this week, or you raise your price to the buyer, and raising your price to the buyer means some buyers don't buy, which means you sell fewer at the higher price, and the calculation of which approach loses you less money on balance is the calculation you do in your head while walking to the Palais Royal in the dark at 4:30 in the morning, with the August heat already present even before dawn, already making a case for itself. You raise the price. You sell fewer. You lose approximately the same amount either way. This is the economy of the margins. You are always at the margins. The margin is where you live, and the margin narrows when the economy tightens, and the economy tightening is what the economy of 1787 is doing. Tightening, very gradually, the way something tightens before it breaks. The autumn begins. The harvest news is confirmed in September, bad, not catastrophic, but bad, and the price of bread moves up again, reaching 15 sous by October, 15 sous for a £4 loaf in a city where a day labourer earns 25 sous on a good day, and where a flower girl on a very good day earns 60 sous, and on a bad day earns 12, and where the distance between the good day and the bad day depends on the weather and the police and the quality of the stock and a dozen other variables that cannot be controlled and that can only be managed approximately, imperfectly, daily. You have been in Paris for a year and a half. You're not the person who arrived. The person who arrived would not recognize the way you hold the basket, the way you gauge a buyer, the way you move through the crowd at the Innocents in the dark and find the best stock by touch and smell as much as by sight, because your hands and nose now know things that your eyes still miss sometimes. The person who arrived would not recognize your knowledge of the streets, or your economy of language, or the way you can tell from the specific quality of the noise in the Palais Royal, whether the afternoon will be good, or whether you should pack up early and find a different pitch. The person who arrived from Rouen in spring of 1787, with hope in the place where practical knowledge now lives, that person is not here anymore. You are here. You are what she became. You are not sure if this is progress. You are sure it is change. Madeline is the person who knows this most clearly, because Madeline has watched it happen in the specific way that people who work alongside you watch things that you cannot see because you are inside them. She does not say this directly. Madeline does not say most things directly. Directness is a luxury of people who have the time and the energy to manage its consequences, and Madeline manages her energy with the precision of someone who has calculated the cost of everything many times. What she says in November of 1787, in the early dark of the market at the Innocents, while you're selecting carnations and she is negotiating with the rose supplier about a price that has gone up by 3 sous since last month. You're good at this now. 4 words. You, '.re. Good at this now. You hold them carefully, the way you hold the first sail of the morning, the way you hold the warmth after a hot drink. Not for their sentiment, though the sentiment is real. For the information they contain. From Madeline, you're good at this now is not encouragement. It is assessment. She does not say things she does not mean. Not to you, not any more. You're good at this now. The winter comes back. This is the thing about winters in Paris. They come back. Every year. Reliably and without surprise. The cold that you thought you understood from last winter is this winter's cold again. And this winter's cold has a slightly different quality. Deeper, earlier, arriving in November instead of December, producing in the first week of December a frost that coats everything, every stone of every street, every spoke of every wheel, every shutter of every window on the Rue Ouze, in a layer of ice that makes the morning walk to the market a negotiation between you and gravity, in which gravity has the structural advantages of being everywhere and weighing nothing. You fall once. In December, on the ice near the Pont Neuf, you fall. The sabot goes out from under you and you go down on your left side, the basket swinging wide, and you land on the cobblestones with the specific violence of a fall that happens faster than thought can follow it. Your left hand going out to catch yourself, and your left palm meeting the ice-covered stone with the particular intimacy of unintended contact. The flowers scatter. 3 bunches of the violettes, the lavender, 2 of the roses. You lie there for a moment, just a moment. Your left hand is stinging with the cold amplified pain of skin meeting stone, and your hip is saying something emphatic about what cobblestones feel like from this angle. The cold of the stone comes up through your dress immediately, the specific cold of something much colder than the air. Stone in December having stored the cold of December in its mass in a way that air cannot. You get up. You gather the flowers. 2 bunches of the violettes are salvageable. The lavender is a loss, one of the roses. People have walked past while this happened. No one has stopped. This is not cruelty. This is Paris, where falling is a thing that happens and people who have a place to be have a place to be. You understand this completely. You would have walked past someone else falling. Not from cruelty. From necessity. Your left palm, when you look at it in the better light near the bridge lantern, has a graze across the heel of the hand, the kind of graze that is already bleeding slightly, and that will hurt more later when the cold stops masking it. You wrap the hand in the edge of your shawl. You keep walking. This is what you do. You keep walking. The spring of 1788 arrives, and the news from the countryside arrives with it. And the news is not good, and by news I mean the conversations at the market and in the Garni kitchen and in the cafes of the Palais Royal, where the pamphlets are thicker than ever, and the voices behind them more urgent than they were in the autumn, which were more urgent than they were in the summer, which were more urgent than they were the previous spring, the urgency of Paris ratcheting upward in increments that each seems small, and that are cumulatively enormous. The harvest of 1787 was bad. The harvest of 1788 will be worse. Nobody knows this yet in April. In April, the fields are just fields. the grain not yet planted in many places, the future of the harvest still theoretical, still the kind of thing that depends on what happens between now and August, which is still 4 months away, which is a long time, which is long enough for things to be different. But the spring of 1788 is not a spring that feels like enough time for things to be different. The spring of 1788 feels like the specific moment in a story when the reader knows something the characters do not know, and the knowing is not comfortable. You feel this without knowing how to describe it. Paris in spring of 1788 feels the way a room feels when a fight is about to start. Everyone still talking, still moving normally, but something in the air has changed. Something has shifted in the relationship between the things people are saying and the things people are thinking, and the gap between those two things is widening, and has been widening for months. And there is a point at which the width of the gap becomes the event. On a Wednesday in June of 1788, you see the thing that teaches you the most specific lesson the city has given you so far. You're at the Palais Royal in the morning. It is a good morning, warm, the kind of Paris warmth that is comfortable rather than oppressive, that makes the arcades pleasant and the gardens pleasant and the people moving through them pleasant in the loose-limbed way of people who are warm and not yet too hot. Your basket is full of peonies and roses, the summer stock, and the sellers have arranged themselves under the arcades with the comfortable familiarity of people who've been doing this long enough that the arrangements are settled. A man comes into the arcade from the garden side. He is walking quickly, not running, but the walking of someone who is keeping themselves from running. He is holding papers, pamphlets, folded 3 or 4 of them, and his face has the specific expression of someone who has just heard something and has not yet decided what to do with the having heard it. He goes directly to the cafe on the corner of the arcade. He goes inside. Through the window you can see him talking to the men at the nearest table. The men at the table lean in. One of them stands. Within 10 minutes the cafe has changed. The normal noise of the cafe, conversation, the clink of cups, the argumentative but comfortable sound of men who are arguing the way they always argue, has become something different, more concentrated, more still. The kind of noise that a space makes when it is full of people who are all paying attention to the same thing. You do not know what they have heard. You're selling roses. You're watching, but you are selling roses. By noon, you know what they heard. The Parliament of Paris, the great law court that is supposed to register royal edicts, and that has been refusing for 2 years to register the tax reforms that might save the royal finances. The Parlement has issued a declaration that the king cannot levy new taxes without the consent of the Estates General, the National Assembly that has not met since 1614. 174 years. The Estates General has not met since 1614, and the Parlement is saying it must meet now. That nothing can be decided about money or taxes, or the future of France without it. This is either the most boring thing you've ever heard, or it is the most important thing you've ever heard, and the choice between those two depends entirely on whether you understand that the Estates General, which is the thing that sounds like a legal process, is actually the mechanism by which the pressure that has been building in Paris and in the countryside and in the bread queues and in the pamphlets and in the cafes of the Palais Royal for the past 2 years will either be released safely or not be released at all. You do not know this. You know what you always know. The roses are 4 sous for the small bunch, 6 for the large, and the peonies are 5 sous and they are at their best today and will be past their best by tomorrow. But something in the air of the Palais Royal today is different, and you know that, and Madeleine knows it, and the flower sellers and the coffee sellers and the booksellers and the men reading pamphlets all know it, and the knowledge is in the air the way the smell of thunder is in the air before the thunder, the specific electrical quality of a moment that is about to become something else. We should sell quickly today, Madeline says, and leave early. Every time you say that something happens, you say, "Yes," says Madeline, "that's why I say it. You sell quickly. You leave at 2 with 38 sous and some flowers that you will sell tomorrow, and you walk back across the Pont Neuf in the June afternoon with the feeling that you are walking away from something large that is about to become larger. The Pont Neuf. You've crossed it hundreds of times now. The oldest bridge in Paris, completed in 1607 after a construction that took 26 years, built of stone across the Seine with no houses on it, which was revolutionary when it was built because all other bridges had houses. The first bridge in Paris to have a footpath raised above the roadway, where foot traffic is separated from the carts and the horses and the carriages, and the wheelbarrows and the men pushing things and the men pulling things and the general commerce of the river crossing. The Pont Neuf is also the most theatrical place in Paris. On the bridge there are always performers. The tooth pullers who advertise their services with mountebank shows, the medicine sellers whose assistants put on comedies to draw crowds, the puppeteers, the musicians, the acrobats who use the stone balustrade as their stage, and the drop into the scene as their particular dramatic backdrop. There are booksellers with their stalls. There are flower sellers. You have sold here on slow days when the pitched pitches were closed to you. There is the statue of Henri IV on horseback, weathered now, the bronze darker than bronze in paintings of it, but still there, still on his horse, still presiding over the crossing with the specific authority of a dead king who has become purely symbolic. And there is the view. Standing on the Pont Neuf on a clear June afternoon in 1788, you can see downstream to the east and upstream to the west and across to the towers of Notre Dame on the Île de la Cité, and further still in both directions along the course of the river, the city spread on both banks, the specific skyline of Paris that is towers and spires, and the dome of the Invalides to the south, and the towers of the Conciergerie, and the Palais de Justice here on the Île de la Cité, and behind you to the north, the streets of the right bank running up toward the hills of Montmartre. You stop in the middle of the bridge. You've stopped here before, but always briefly, always with the basket on your arm and the sense of time running. Today you stop and you look. You look in the way that Sundays at Notre Dame taught you, without the basket being the reason you are anywhere, without the calculation, just looking. The river below you is moving in the specific summer way, lower than winter, slower. The greenish-brown of late June water in a river that receives everything the city gives it and carries it downstream to wherever the sea is, somewhere out of sight, somewhere past the horizon. There are boats. Of course there are boats. There are always boats on the Seine. The river is still the highway Madeleine described when you started doing this, still the fastest route between any two places on its banks. A flat-bottomed barge, loaded with what looks like timber, moving upstream with the slow authority of a very heavy thing that is going where it is going regardless of everything else. A pair of passenger boats, the kind the watermen row, crossing each other's wakes with the practised indifference of professionals. Something small and quick moving with the current downstream, a small fishing boat perhaps, or someone who knows exactly what they are doing and has decided to use the current rather than fight it. 800,000 people, this city. 800,000 people trying to eat and sleep and work and raise children and argue about politics and sell flowers and read pamphlets and figure out what comes next. And the river through the middle of them, indifferent to all of it, moving the way rivers move toward the sea, as it has moved since before Paris was a city, and as it will move after Paris has been whatever Paris will become. You're such a small part of this. You think about the young woman who arrived here 18 months ago from Rouen with hope and ignorance in roughly equal proportions, and who has traded the ignorance gradually for something more useful. You think about the things you know now that you did not know then, which pitches are safe and which are risky, which suppliers overcharge in winter, and which ones are honest all year. How to tell from a buyer's walk whether they are going to stop, how to hold yourself when a gendarme approaches, how to navigate the Palais Royal, how to make change for coins you have never seen before, from the pockets of buyers from countries you have never visited, how to darn a sock in the dark, how to make a meal from 4 sous, how to sleep in a room that smells of 60 people when sleep is what you need, because morning comes early and morning always comes. This is what you have bought with 18 months of Paris. This knowledge, this specific, practical, hard-won knowledge of survival in a particular city at a particular time. And the city is changing. You can feel it from the bridge, looking at the skyline. The same buildings they have always been, the same towers, the same domes. But the city inside them is different from the city you arrived in, and the difference is not in the buildings, but in the people, in the pressure building between the reality of what people have and the reality of what people need, and the conversations in the cafes and the pamphlets under the arcades and the bread queues getting longer, and the bread price getting higher, and the harvest getting worse, and the conversations about the Estates General getting louder and more specific about what the Estates General should actually do when it meets, which it is now definitely going to do, which the King has now actually agreed to, which is the thing the Parlement said in June, that everyone in the Palais Royal heard, and which has been reverberating through the city's conversations ever since. Something is going to happen. You do not know what. You do not know when. You know only that the city you're looking at from the middle of this bridge is not the same city you arrived in, and the city you will be in next year will not be the same city you're standing in now, and the changes are moving faster than they were moving when you arrived, and the direction of the changes is the direction that pamphlets and hunger and bread prices and the conversations of men in cafes always point, which is toward the moment when the pressure exceeds the structure designed to contain it. You pick up your basket, you walk off the bridge. Tomorrow, 4 o'clock, the dark, the cold, the market, the flowers. Tonight, the evening meal is bread. You bought a loaf, the good kind, £4, 15 sous, because today was a good day. And sometimes on a good day you eat bread that is actually bread rather than the soup that is mostly water with intentions, and the cheese that Marie-Jeanne brought back from somewhere, hard and sharp, the kind that has been aged past the point of softness into something more interesting. You eat at the table with Marie-Jeanne and Sophie, and the kitchen is warm with the fire that Madame Torchon maintains through June, because the building needs heat somewhere, and you eat and you talk, which is unusual, more unusual than not talking, but tonight is a night that wants talking. I heard something today, Sophie says. Sophie, who's been in Paris now for 6 months, who has learned the laundry work and the walk to the laundry, and the shortcuts through the Marais, and the specific economy of laundry wages in 1788. Sophie, who is no longer quiet in the way she was quiet when she arrived. At the laundry, one of the women has a husband who is a printer. What did she say, you ask? She said the king is going to call the Estates General, Sophie says, for next year, 1789. We know, Marie-Jeanne says. Everyone knows. She said the Third Estate. Sophie pauses, working out how to say the next part. She said the Third Estate is going to have more representatives than the other two combined. She said that's never happened before. You look at her. The three estates, the clergy, the First Estate, the nobility, the Second Estate, the rest of France, the merchants, the artisans, the lawyers, the farmers, the laundry women, the flower girls, the Third Estate. Together they make up the Estates General, which makes the laws and approves the taxes in theory. And the question of how many votes each estate gets is the question on which everything else depends. If the Third Estate has the same number of votes as the other two combined, and if they vote together they can outvote the clergy and the nobility, every time, on everything. You are a flower girl. You sell violettes in the Palais Royal. You do not vote. Women do not vote in 1788 in France, which is a fact that sits alongside all the other facts about 1788 in France, and does not need additional commentary. But the women in the bread queues cannot vote either, and the laundry women cannot vote, and the women who work in the workshops of the Faubourg Saint-Antoine cannot vote, and the women who sweep the steps of the churches, and the women who clean the apartments of the rich, and the women who do the work that the city requires to function cannot vote. And none of this changes what is building. The voting is one part of a larger pressure, and the larger pressure is not about voting, it is about bread. The Third Estate is going to ask for something, Sophie says, and the clergy and the nobility are going to say no. And then she stops. And then, Marie-Jeanne says. I don't know, Sophie says. The woman at the laundry didn't know either. She said her husband the printer is printing so much these days he comes home with ink on his face. You think about this. The printer who comes home with ink on his face. The pamphlets multiplying under the arcades of the Palais Royal. The crowds in the cafe who lean in when a man arrives with news. The bread price that has been rising for 18 months without interruption, moving upward with the specific indifference of something that is not being directed by anyone's will, but by the logic of harvest and storage and speculation, and the weather over fields you have never seen in regions you have never visited. Fields that are deciding the price of your bread and the length of the queue you pass every morning on the way to the flower market. The spring will come, you say. Marie-Jeanne looks at you. This is not what she expected you to say. The spring of 1789, you say, and then the Estates General, and then whatever comes after. You eat your bread. The fire crackles. Outside, the Rue aux Ours is doing what it always does, which is existing noisily unsleeping, the city's smallest instrument in its largest orchestra. You will be here for it, whatever it is. You will be here. That is not a decision you have made. It is simply a fact that the city and your life within it have produced. You are here. You will continue to be here. You will continue to get up at 4 and walk to the market and carry the basket and sell the flowers and make the calculations and pay the rent and eat the soup and darn the socks and breathe the air of this city that is about to become something different from what it has been. That is already becoming something different. That has been becoming something different for as long as you have been in it. You just did not know what to call the becoming until now. What do you call it? You do not know yet. Nobody does. The autumn of 1788 arrives, and it arrives badly. The harvest has been, as the spring suggested it would be, the worst in living memory. There was a hailstorm in July that destroyed crops across a wide band of northern France, the kind of hailstorm that happens perhaps once in a decade, and that happened this year This specific year, which is the year when the financial system is also in crisis and the parliaments are also in crisis and the streets of Paris are also in something that is moving slowly but with increasing confidence toward crisis. The bread price in November of 1788 is 18 sous for a 4-pound loaf. This is the number, 18 sous. A day labourer earns 25 sous a day, on a good day, in summer, in winter, with less work, perhaps 20, perhaps 15. Bread, 18 sous. Wages, perhaps 20. On a bad day, less than 20. The mathematics of this are simple, and the mathematics of this are the end of something, some agreement that is held between the city and its people about the minimum of what is possible, and the mathematics of this are building in the bread queues and in the garni rooms and in the cafes of the Palais Royal, and in the pamphlets that are being printed so fast that the printers come home with ink on their faces, toward the moment when the mathematics become undeniable, when the gap between bread costs and wages cannot be argued away or talked through or waited out, when the gap becomes the only thing that matters, and the closing of the gap becomes the only conversation worth having. You know this in the way you know the weather, in the quality of the air, in the specific silence of the bread queues in November, which is a silence different from the silence of any previous winter, harder, more concentrated, the silence of people who have been quiet about this for a long time and are running out of quiet. You stand in the queue yourself sometimes now, your own bread, bought before the market, because the loaf has to be purchased and the flour stock has to be purchased, and one of them has to come first. And sometimes it is the bread. Sometimes the bread is the urgent thing. Sometimes your body makes the decision before your mind does by being specifically and unmistakably hungry in a way that will not negotiate. The woman in front of you in the queue one morning in November is perhaps 40, with the hands of someone who does outdoor work and the face of someone who has been cold for a long time. She's standing with the specific stillness of the queues, not moving, not fidgeting, simply present, waiting. How long have you been here? You ask. Since 4, she says. She does not look at you. It is now 5:30, an hour and a half in the dark and the cold, waiting for a bakery to open. Is it always this long, you ask? She looks at you now. Where have you been? She says. Not rudely, just a question that contains information about the distance between your experience and hers. Selling flowers, you say, at the Palais Royal, and the innocents. She looks at you for a moment. You sell flowers, she says. Yes, you say. My husband did woodwork, she says. The workshops have been closing, no orders. The people who order woodwork are the people who have money, and the people who have money are, she pauses, are not spending money on woodwork. You think about this. The people who buy flowers at the Palais Royal in the mornings, the men from last night's carousing buying roses for the women they're going home to, the English tourists buying orange blossom, these people are still buying flowers, still have the money, still have the mood that wants beauty in the morning, but they are also apparently not commissioning furniture. What does he do now, you ask? What he can, she says. The queue moves. You both move with it. 18 sous, she says, to the heir to the queue, not specifically to you. Last year it was 12. Do you know what 12 sous to 18 sous means? You know exactly what 12 sous to 18 sous means. You have known it since February. It means the difference between eating and not eating, you say. She looks at you. It means my children eat every other day, she says. You stand in the queue and you hold this sentence. You hold it the way you hold the first sale of the morning, except this is not the warmth after a hot drink. This is the cold after something that removes warmth. This is the specific coldness of a fact that has been stated simply, and that sits in the air between you and the woman in the queue and does not warm itself by being stated. Children who eat every other day, in Paris, in the capital of France, while there are warehouses somewhere containing grain, while the king's court at Versailles is still the court at Versailles, while the candles at Versailles are still the candles at Versailles, 30,000 of them burning in the Hall of Mirrors on the occasion of a reception, 30,000 candles made of tallow and beeswax and fragrant wood, and the labour of people who are being paid less for their labour this year than last year, and next year will be paid less still. This is what the pamphlets are about. This is what the men in the cafes are gesturing about. This is what the Parlement has been refusing to register, and what the Estates General is going to be called to resolve. This is what is building in the bread queues, and in the conversations in the Garni rooms, and in the print shops where the printers come home with ink on their faces. Children who eat every other day. You buy your bread. You go to the market. You buy your flowers. You sell them. You make 46 sous. You pay for your room. You pay for your soup. You put 10 sous in the hem reserve, which is the fullest it has been since you arrived, which is a fact that ought to make you feel something, and does, but not the thing it ought to make you feel, because you know that 46 sous on a good day, and children who eat every other day are happening in the same city, on the same morning, in the same November, and the distance between them is not large, and is not growing smaller. December. The winter of 1788 to 1789 is the coldest Paris has seen in almost 100 years. The numbers will be recorded eventually in the weather journals of the time. Temperatures that freeze the Seine solid, temperatures that kill birds as they sit on the rooftops, temperatures that make the specific cold of January 1787 seem like a disagreement about cardigan weight. You know this winter from the inside. You know it from the cold that freezes the water in the washing basin into a solid disk overnight that you break every morning with your fist. That leaves a red mark on your fist that lasts the day. You know it from the flowers that arrive from the south frozen, from the market stall holders stamping their feet and blowing on their hands and saying things about the weather that be funny in a warmer month and are simply true in December. You know it from the sensation of your feet in the sabots, which is the sensation of feet that have been attached to a cold object for so long that they have stopped being feet and become cold objects themselves, and the getting warm again at the end of the day is its own specific process, not comfortable, not pleasant. The pins and needles of circulation returning to places where it had given up. The bread price in December of 1788 is 18 sous. Still 18 sous. It has not gone higher, which is either a mercy or a coincidence, but it has not gone lower, and lower is what it needs to go. Lower is what the people in the bread queues have been standing and waiting for it to do. You have enough. You have enough because of the Hem Reserve and because of the Palais Royal and because of Madeleine and because of 18 months of learning how this works, this specific economy of surviving at the margin. You have enough, barely enough, precisely enough every day as a calculation that ends in enough when the calculation works and in not enough when the calculation fails, and so far the calculation has worked more often than not. You think about the woman in the queue in November, the children who eat every other day. Madeleine, you say one morning in January of 1789, the innocence in the dark, the cold of the worst winter in a century, your breath in the lantern light. She says, what happens when it breaks? She is selecting narcissi from a crate. Her 4.5 fingers moving with precision in the cold, feeling for the firmness of the stems, the tightness of the buds, the signs that distinguish the flowers that will hold through a selling day from the ones that will not. When what breaks, she says, you gesture. The word for what you mean is not a word you have exactly. You gesture at the market and the dark and the bread prices and the estates general that's going to meet in May, and the pamphlets and the queues and everything the gesture contains. Madeleine is quiet for a moment. Something breaks every year, she says. The question is what's underneath it? She puts the narcissi in her basket. When the old structure breaks, she says, there is either something to replace it, or there is nothing. If there is something, the something takes over and eventually becomes the new structure. If there is nothing, it is a long time before things are organized again. She looks at you. Either way, she says, people still want flowers. This is Madeleine. This is the most Madeleine thing Madeleine has ever said. Either way, people still want flowers. It is not wisdom exactly, or not only wisdom. It is also the survival philosophy of someone who has organized her entire understanding of existence around the fact that beauty is not optional, that the purchase of something that grows from the earth and smells like the south and costs 4 sous is not a luxury in the way that the court thinks luxury means, that it is a necessity of the specific kind that does not go on any list of necessities, because necessities are usually things with weight and substance, things that prevent you from dying, and flowers do not prevent you from dying, but they prevent something else from dying, something harder to name, something that might be, you are not sure, hope or memory, or the refusal to accept that the only things that matter are the things that are strictly necessary. Either way, people still want flowers. You put your own narcissi in your basket. You walk toward the Palais Royal. The spring comes. It comes the way Madeleine said it would come. Late March, early April. The light changing first and the temperature changing second and the flowers changing third. The spring stock arriving at the Innocents in quantities that the winter did not have, the market brightening, the air of the city brightening with it, or at least less dark, which in Paris in the late 18th century is the best approximation of brightening that is available. The Estates General meets in May of 1789 at Versailles. You know this. Everyone knows this. The meeting is the event that the winter has been moving toward, the moment when the pressure is going to be either released or not released, when the question of what happens to France is going to be asked, formally, in the presence of the king and the clergy and the nobility and the representatives of the Third Estate, which is you, which is not you, which is a category that contains you without including you, which is the thing that the men in the cafes of the Palais Royal are arguing about with more intensity than ever. The weeks before the meeting are the loudest weeks you have experienced in Paris. The Palais Royal is the centre of it, the place where the arguments are loudest and the pamphlets thickest and the conversations most urgent. And selling flowers there now requires more navigation than it used to require, more attention to where you're standing and which conversation is happening around you, and when a conversation is moving towards something that will require you to not be there. You're good at this now. You sell, you navigate, you calculate, you go home, you sleep, you wake at 4. The news from Versailles comes in pieces, carried to Paris by the people who go to Versailles and come back, and by the printers who print the accounts, and by the men in the cafes who read the accounts aloud and argue about them. The Third Estate is refusing to vote by estate. They want everyone to vote individually. All 600 representatives of the Third Estate, plus the clergy and nobility, who choose to join them, voting as one body, which would give the Third Estate its arithmetic advantage. The king is refusing to allow this. The Third Estate is sitting in their meeting hall doing nothing, holding their ground, waiting. On the 17th of June, the Third Estate declares itself the National Assembly of France. Not the representatives of the Third Estate, the National Assembly of France. You hear this in the Palais Royal on the 18th, from the man who reads the news from a printed sheet to the crowd in the garden. The crowd is very quiet while he reads, and then it is not quiet at all, and then it is something that you feel in your chest before you hear it. The sound of a crowd that has heard something it has been waiting to hear, and is now not sure what to do with the hearing. The National Assembly of France, the Third Estate, the lawyers and the merchants and the artisans and the farmers and the women in the bread queues and the men whose workshops are closing and the children who eat every other day, has declared itself the government of France. This is either the most important thing that has happened in France since 1614, or it is a declaration that will be reversed by Tuesday, and everyone involved will be imprisoned. You stand in the arcade and you hold your basket and you think about which of those two things it is. Madeleine is standing beside you. She is also listening. Her expression does not change, which is Madeleine's expression, when she is paying very close attention to something and has not yet decided what the something means. "Well," she says finally. "Well," you agree. "The flowers," she says, "they're wilting." You look at your basket. She is right. The roses in the excitement of the crowd have been neglected, and the roses, being roses, have taken this personally. You sell the roses, discounted quickly, to a woman who barely notices she is buying them, who is reading a pamphlet while she hands you the coins, who has already moved back into whatever conversation she is having with herself about what the National Assembly means for her, for France, for the bread price. The bread price. Nobody says this in the conversations around you, in the cafes of the Palais Royal, in the pamphlets. Nobody says all of this, the Estates General, the National Assembly, the Declaration. All of it is about the bread price. They say it is about liberty. They say it is about the rights of the people. They say it is about representation and the rule of law and the consent of the governed. And it is about all of those things. And it is also about bread that cost 18 sous when wages are 20 and children eat every other day. The two are not separate. The liberty and the bread are the same argument at different levels of abstraction. And the people in the bread queues and the people in the cafes of the Palais Royal are both having the same argument. They're just having it in different languages, and the language of the cafe is getting louder. The weeks of June move quickly. The king locks the Third Estate out of their meeting hall. They move to a nearby tennis court and take an oath. The tennis court oath, which the pamphlets are already calling it, history naming itself even as it happens, that you will not separate until France has a constitution. The clergy begin to join them, then some of the nobility. The lines between the estates are blurring. Something that was three things is becoming one thing, and the one thing it is becoming is the National Assembly, and the National Assembly is claiming the authority of France. On the 11th of July, the king dismisses his minister Necker. Necker, who was the minister the people of Paris had some faith in, or at least some hope in, the minister who was not the worst of them, the minister whose dismissal means the king has chosen the other direction, has chosen to push back rather than yield, has chosen the royal authority over the popular pressure that has been building for 2 years. You hear this on the 12th, at the Innocents, early morning, from a man buying lavender for a household where he works, who tells you quickly, as if the telling is itself urgent, as if you need to know immediately, which you do, because what happens next you need to know before it happens, which is what Madeleine has always said. Know before, not after. You go to Madeleine. Necker, you say. She's already nodding, she already knows. Go home, she says. Take your flowers, sell what you can on the way, go home. What's going to happen? Madeleine looks at you with the expression she uses when a question deserves a real answer. The thing that was going to happen, she says, is going to happen. You go home. You sell on the way, quickly, without the Palais Royal, without the long approach, just selling on the Rue Saint-Denis as you pass through it, moving steadily, watching the streets which are already, it is 7 in the morning, already carrying a different current than usual, people moving with urgency and without clear direction. The specific human traffic of a city where something is happening and not everyone knows yet what. You sell the lavender and the roses. You keep the narcissi. You get home with 30 sous and the narcissi, and the sense that the city around you is reorganizing itself around something you cannot yet see. The 14th of July, 1789. You will remember this day for the rest of your life, not because of what you see. You do not see the Bastille, which is on the other side of the city, which you know only as a name, the name of the fortress prison in the Faubourg Saint-Antoine, where the king's prisoners are held under the lettres de cachet, the secret orders, the instruments of royal power that the pamphlets have been denouncing for months. You will remember this day not because you see the Bastille, but because of what the day feels like, what it sounds like, what it does to the air of the city. You wake at 4. You go to the market. The market is open but different. Fewer sellers, fewer buyers. The professional quiet of the pre-dawn hours replaced by a different quiet. The quiet of people who are here because the day must continue even if the day is not a normal day, even if the city is something different. You buy narcissi. You buy the last of the peonies, which are almost out of season now. You walk toward the Palais Royal. The streets are not empty, but they are not the streets you know. There are people moving in ways that are not the ways people move on a normal morning. Faster, in groups, in directions that do not correspond to the usual directions. A group of men carrying what appear to be weapons, clubs, pikes, 1 or 2 swords, moving south at a pace that is not a walk, not quite a run, the pace of people who are going somewhere and are not stopping for anyone. You stop. You watch them pass. 8 men. 12. They are not looking at you. They are not looking at anything on the street. Their eyes are fixed ahead of them, on something that is not visible from where you are standing, but that they know is there. You think of Madeleine. You do not go to the Palais Royal. You go home. You sit in the kitchen with Madame Torchon, who is the kind of woman who sits in kitchens during events rather than going out into events, who pours you a cup of something warm and says nothing, because Madame Torchon has been in Paris long enough to know that some days the thing to do is make something warm and wait to find out what has happened. By afternoon, you know, the people of Paris have taken the Bastille, stormed it, overwhelmed its garrison, freed its prisoners. The governor is dead. The fortress that is the symbol of everything the pamphlets have been saying about the king's power and the king's willingness to imprison people without trial, and the king's authority over the people who built it with their labour. The Bastille is taken. You sit in the kitchen and you hold this information. The Bastille is taken. Sophie comes in, running, breathless, her laundry dress damp at the collar, her eyes very wide and very bright. "Did you hear?" she says. "Did you—" "Yes," you say. "The Bastille," she says. "Yes," you say. She sits down across from you. She's breathing hard from running, from the day, from whatever she has seen on the streets of Paris. What does it mean? She asks. You think about what Madeleine said. What breaks? What is underneath when it breaks? Whether there is something there or nothing. I don't know yet, you say. You go to Madeleine the next morning, the 15th of July, 1789. You find her at the Innocents, which is open, which Madeleine is at because the market is open, and the flowers need buying and selling regardless of what happened yesterday, because yesterday happened and will go on happening in the history books and the pamphlets and the conversations for a very long time. But today is today, and today has flowers. Is it going to be all right, you ask? Which is a question so large and so unspecific that Madeleine should not be able to answer it and probably won't. Madeleine looks at you. The spring will come, she says. She picks up her basket. And before the spring there's today. She walks toward the market. You follow her. The narcissi are very good today. The seller says they came in last night, just before everything, just before the city became whatever the city is now. And they are fresh and tight and the exact purple yellow of narcissi when they're at their best. And they smell, as narcissi smell when they are at their best, like something a word has not been invented for yet. You put them in your basket. You think about the woman in the bread queue and the children who eat every other day. You think about the National Assembly and the tennis court oath and the men with the clubs moving through the streets yesterday morning. You think about the grain merchants' warehouses. You think about the Palais Royal and the pamphlets. You think about what Madeleine said. Either way, people still want flowers. You think about your father's loom in Rouen, idle in a house that is still there, where people are still living who will read about this in the weeks to come and will not quite believe it, and then will believe it, and then will understand that the thing they are believing is the beginning of something they cannot yet see the shape of. You pick up your basket. The narcissi in it are the particular violet and gold of very fresh narcissi on a summer morning in a city that has just become something other than what it was and does not yet know what it will be instead. You walk toward Rue Saint-Denis. Narcissi, narcissi fraîche, bouquet pour la belle dame. Your voice in the July air, making its small clouds of steam. The street still busy, still noisy, the sellers and the buyers and the horses and the carts and the people going somewhere and the people going nowhere, all of them in motion, all of them part of the city that is right now, in this moment, in the middle of becoming something extraordinary. You sell. The first sale comes early. A woman stops without you calling to her. She's perhaps 30, with the face of someone who has not slept, who's been awake through whatever last night was in her particular part of the city, who has perhaps been at the queues or in the streets or simply awake, listening, unable to sleep through the sound of a city remaking itself. She looks at the narcissi. How much? She says. 4 sous for the large bunch, you say. 3 for the small. She buys the large. She gives you 4 sous. She does not bargain. She holds the narcissi and she breathes them in. The same gesture you see 5 times a day, the unconscious gesture of someone receiving a smell that takes them somewhere else. That does the work that beauty does, which is to be briefly and completely outside the thing you're standing in the middle of, and to be reminded that there are places in the world where the air smells like this, where it is warm and where things grow, and where the only problem is that there are too many flowers and not enough room for them all. She opens her eyes. She's back in Paris, on the Rue Saint-Denis, on the morning of the 15th of July, 1789, the day after the Bastille fell, the first day of whatever comes next. She thanks you. She walks away with the narcissi under her arm. You watch her go. 4 sous, a good start. You sell the rest of the morning and into the afternoon, and the city around you is the city it always is, and is also something it has never been before, simultaneously. Both of these things true at once, which is the specific nature of the days when everything changes and the change is not yet visible, except in what you feel when you stand in the middle of the street and breathe the air and listen to the sound of a city that has done something it cannot undo. The Bastille is taken. The Third Estate has declared itself the National Assembly. The king will not be the king the way the king has been the king for as long as anyone alive can remember. Something is different. Something is going to be very different. Something is already so different that the difference is in the air, is in the conversations, is in the silence that falls sometimes between the conversations, the silence of people taking stock of what they are now part of. You sell the last of the narcissi at 4 in the afternoon, 58 sous. You pack your basket, you walk home. The Rue aux Ours is quieter than usual. Not empty, not the quiet of fear, just the quiet of a city that has used a great deal of itself in the last 24 hours and is taking a breath before whatever comes next. Madame Torchon is in the entry hall. 4 sous, she says. You give her 4 sous. There's soup, she says. You eat the soup. Later, in the room, in the dark, with Marie-Jeanne's breathing, and Sophie's breathing and the distant sound of the street, you lie on the mattress and you do not sleep immediately. You lie there and you listen to Paris. Paris is loud tonight. Not the usual loud, not the taverns and the horses and the music from somewhere and the calling of the watchman. Something else. Something that is farther away and closer than the usual sounds. Something that comes through the walls and the floor and the air itself. The sound of a city that has passed through something and is not sure yet what it has passed into. Children who eat every other day, you think. And the spring will come. And either way, people still want flowers. And take the morning. You took the morning. Many mornings. You took the market and the cold and the blister and the cracked knuckles and the police inspector with the papers and the man at the Palais Royal who wanted what he was not going to get, and the woman in the bread queue and the narcissi from Grasse and the 18-sous bread and the Hem Reserve and the small pot of tallow that runs out in winter and the nod from Madeleine that means you are good at this now. You have become someone who is good at this. You have become someone who belongs here, even though belonging here was never the plan. The plan was something else. The plan was hope in a general direction, and the general direction has become this city, this life, this basket, this morning, this next morning, the one after. You close your eyes. Outside, Paris continues. The bells of Saint-Eustache mark the hour. Not the quarter hour, the full hour. Far away, somewhere in the direction of the Faubourg Saint-Antoine, there is a sound that might be cheering, might be the specific sound of a city celebrating something it has just done and is still not sure was a dream. It was not a dream. You know this. You can feel the not dreamness of it in the air. Tomorrow, 4 o'clock, the dark, the market, the flowers, always the flowers. You're warm enough, you're fed enough, you're safe enough. You have a roof and a mattress and a small pot of tallow and a needle and thread in a case that belonged to your Aunt Hortense, and a piece of paper in your bodice that says you are a flower girl, with a licence for the Rue Saint-Denis and 30 sous in the Hem Reserve and the specific practical knowledge of a flower girl who's been selling in this city for nearly 2 years, and who knows which streets are safe and which are not, which suppliers can be trusted and which cannot, which buyers will stop and which will not, which mornings will be good and which will not, and that the mornings that are not good are still mornings, and the mornings that are not good still end, and the endings of mornings are followed by afternoons, and the endings of afternoons by evenings, and the endings of evenings by nights, and the nights by 4 o'clock. Always 4 o'clock, always the bells of Saint Eustache, always the cold and the dark and the market and the flowers. The city outside your window is different from the city it was yesterday, and it will be different tomorrow from what it is tonight. It is changing in ways that the people in the bread queues will feel before they can name, and that the men in the cafes will name before they can feel, and that you will feel and name simultaneously, in your body and in your understanding at once. Because 2 years in this city has given you both. You are Colette Aubert, you are 16 years old, you came from Rouen with hope in the place where practical knowledge lives now. Your aunt is buried in the churchyard of the Rue aux Ours, and the loom in Rouen is still idle, and the bread queue in the morning is still long, and the flowers in your basket tomorrow morning will be the flowers of a city that has just taken its first very large step into whatever comes next. You will be there when it does. You will be Céline. You will be there. The bells mark another hour. Far away. Close. The sound of the street fades. Not gone. It is never gone. Paris is never gone. Even at 3 in the morning on the night after the Bastille falls, Paris is there, underneath the quiet, running, breathing, making its endless argument with itself about what it is, and what it should be, and what it will be. And the argument is very old and very new, simultaneously, as old as the city, and as new as yesterday, as old as the hunger, and as new as the word for what the hunger has decided to become. Let it come. Let the sleep take you the way it takes everyone who has worked this hard in this city, the absolute and final sleep of the body that has done everything the day asked of it, and has nothing left to argue with. Let the noise quiet. Let the thinking slow and soften and finally gently stop. You have sold every flower in your basket. You have paid for tonight's roof and tomorrow's bread and next week's stock, and you have 3 sous more than you started with, and 3 sous more than you started with is how you measure progress, not in grounded distances, not in the steps of the great staircase of history that the men in the cafes are gesturing toward with their pamphlets, but in 3 sous, in the blister on the heel that is calloused over, in the cracked knuckles that hold things now with a grip they did not have a year ago, in the nod from Madeleine that says you are good at this now, in the knowledge of which step of the staircase creaks and which does not, in the knowing of where to stand. You know where to stand. That is enough. That has always been enough. That will continue to be enough. The centuries that come after you will not remember your name. They will remember the Bastille. They will remember the names of the men who were in the cafes, and the names of the men who were in the National Assembly, and the names of the men who wrote the pamphlets that were passed under the arcades of the Palais Royal. They will not remember the flower girl who stood at the pitch adjacent to Madeleine and sold narcissi at 4 sous the large bunch on the morning of the 15th of July, 1789, the first day after everything changed. But you were there. You were there, and the flowers were there, and the woman who bought the narcissi and breathed them in with her eyes closed was there, and the relief on her face when the smell of the South reached her on a morning in Paris that smelled like smoke and history was real, and the 4 sous was real, and the weight of the basket was real, and the creak of the second step from the top on the left side was real, and Madeleine's nod was real, and the tallow candle burning down to nothing in the room where 4 women sleep was real, and your Aunt Hortense's needle and thread in the case that you carry against your body the way you carry the license, because some things need to be kept close, all of it real, all of it yours. Sleep. The bell somewhere, marking the deep hours, the hours that belong to no one and to everyone, the hours that have been marking themselves since before Paris was Paris, and will continue marking themselves long after Paris has become whatever it is going to become. You are warm enough, you are fed enough, you are safe enough. Sleep. The flowers for tomorrow are already chosen in your mind. The narcissi, if the supplier has them, the roses if the narcissi are not available, the lavender always. The lavender sells in any weather, in any season, in any city, in any year. Because the smell of lavender is the smell of somewhere not here, somewhere with sun and space and the particular quality of air that grows lavender, and that is what you sell. In the end, underneath the transaction and the coins and the calculations, you sell somewhere not here, to people who need very badly somewhere not here. That is the work. That is the work you do. Good night.